Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming to today's workshop. My name is Felix Urquiza. I work at the mill. I'm the visual effects lead and modeling and texturing supervisor for the mill. So some new faces, some faces I remember from last week's workshop. Who was here last week? Just to raise their hands. Oh, well, almost everybody. Everybody was, okay, cool. So I'll try to go through my side of the story really quickly so you guys don't have to hear it all over again for those of you who are here for the first time or have never.
Hey, sorry. So I have to just interject really fast. That's one.
Yes.
Two, there's not going to be a camera, I think, because the cage cannot be running. So sorry.
Oh.
It is what it is.
Oh, wait. If you want, I can check it out and leave my ID
You
there.
can't check out. I mean,
I checked out these headphones.
Well, good for you if you want to check out. I guess you're
No, but do you want me to ask them that?
Trustworthy you are.
What?
Go ahead, try it, please. Yeah, I'm all for
I'll
it.
be back with the camera.
Sorry, I apologize.
Oh, it's okay.
This is
No
just
worries.
Saturday
Just say
morning
they're
the day
fired and
after.
come check it out.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, Cuddy, gonna have Rob save the day.
And by raise of hands, who's first time workshop here? We got 1, 2, 3, 4. Cool. Nice. There's some first timers. Welcome. So this workshops that I set up was a 3-part workshop. The first one which was last weekend. We went through the industry, what it takes, some of the things that I've experienced in my 10 years of working in the industry, and just kind of went through. This workshop's going to be talking about materials, understanding physical materials and understanding CG materials, and how both work in conjunction to each other, and kind of getting a better understanding of how to think about setting up materials and setting up a look dive. And we'll look at 3 materials. But before we get on into all of that, I said my name is Felix, the modeling texturing supervisor and visual effects lead at the mill. A little bit about me. I am an Art Institute alumni. I graduated here in 2006. That's about 10 years ago. Pretty much, I guess it was June, right? Is that June or July? June. Yeah. So this June, 10 years ago, I graduated. So I did seat in the very same seats you guys are seating. Some of them still look like they're here. So I started my career with Method Studios pretty much 2 weeks after I graduated. At that quarter, we were lucky enough for them to come and visit us, and they saw my work. They were quite interested, and basically gave me a junior staff position right away, which I was super, super stoked about. I worked on my first feature 6 months into my career. Back then, it was Pirates of the Caribbean 3 was my first film credit. I got my first on-set experience 9 months into my career. I led my first job pretty much exactly at a year into my career, and pretty much took off after that. I left Method about 3 years into my career. Then I worked on features for about a little over a year. Did nothing but features. Left hydraulics and started at the mill, and I've been at the mill for almost 6 years. No, yeah, almost 6 years. The longest place I've ever been. So now, 10 years down the road, I am now the face of the modeling texturing department of All Mill. I run all the operations. I run the quality control. I also manage the development for the facility, meaning that I work with developers. I also, for instance, I've been currently working with the Substance guys. I'm working with the president of Substance and the developers, the main developers of Substance Painter, and basically going to try to see if I can work with Substance into the mill. And so I'm working on the development and pipeline for that. Currently our pipeline is Mari. I set up the workflow for the mill. And now I'm kind of working towards how I can bring Substance Painter. So that's also part of my job. So up until this point, I've done features, commercials, music videos, game cinematics. I mean, pretty much the whole 9 yards. I've done them all. They're all, not one is better than the other. Features are awesome. They're very long. which is one thing I didn't really like, is you can do an asset for like 6 months, 4 months, and it's just like, you'll lose your mind when you have like, when you're at like 230 revisions. So I do love commercials because commercials last about 2-3 months, and it's always something different, something new. There's a new project. Done with the other one, excited about a new one, and that excitement kind of takes me through like the 3-4 months, and then a new one comes, and I really like that because it's always something new. Game cinematics are really, really awesome. I love doing game cinematics, but they're extremely, extremely hard to do, especially when the time limit is very, very small. That door is very, very small. Like, you work at Blizzard, you work at the game cinematics, they have all the time in the world, they're their own studio. But a lot of these other game studios outsource the game cinematics to companies like The Mill and Method and Blur that do all the game cinematics, and the time is very, very, very tight. So that means that the expectation and execution of working on the game cinematics is off. It's insane. You know, I've done some of the top names in films, commercials, music videos. I'm a 2-time VS nominee. I was nominated twice for VS nomination. VS, for you guys don't know, is the Visual Effects Society, which is pretty much like the Oscars for visual effects. It is like at the top. Their involvement is all about visual effects. So they host awards every year for anything visual effects, and this is kind of a gathering of every visual effects studio in the world. ILM, Pixar is there, DreamWorks, Weta, you know, you name it, they're all there, and it's an awesome, awesome, awesome experience. So I've been very grateful to be part of that. So let me go ahead and just show you guys my demo reel, and we'll look at the Mills demo reel real quickly to get you an idea of my work. Is that right?
Yeah, it should be.
It sounds like it's just coming from here. It doesn't sound.
Way back. Let's go. Is it headphones?
Yeah. Just do test.
There we go. All right, left there.
You're like,
Very
is that right? I think that was right.
Since I break up and I could have been
Yeah, that's one.
So that's pretty much my reel. So everything that you guys saw was arranged from either all the shots where me, model, texture, looked at, and lighting. So basically, I've executed the whole, pretty much all the CG stuff that you guys saw that was full CG. I did everything from beginning to end, which I did all the modeling, I did all the texturing, I did all the lighting, except the animation. So now let's take a quick look at the Mills demo reel. So you guys can get an idea of the type of work the mill does. Cool. So, let's turn on the lights a little bit. So that was my work and the company that I work for. Don't want to get too much into the mill, but we definitely do high-end commercials, music videos, game cinematics. That's kind of our world. Welcome. So, a little bit to continue to kind of get you guys an idea of my world and what I do on a daily basis. So what I do as a supervisor, basically I manage all of the modeling texturing team. I have a team of about 15 modelers that I supervise and I manage, I help develop as well. I help them reach their goals. I kind of meet with them, we talk about what they want to do, what their goals are, and basically I find them a path and get them close to that career path. I also manage and develop the model texture pipeline, like I was mentioning earlier. So basically, everything, if you were to go to work at the mill, the entire modeling pipeline is I set up for the mill when I first started. Kind of took me about 3 years to kind of develop, put it in place, execution, and getting everybody to start using it. I supervise and lead my own projects. Meaning when a job comes in, I run the entire job from beginning to end. which includes shoot supervising, which I go on set, work with the director, work with the DP, work with the clients, work with the agency, and kind of help them or work together and collaborate on how to execute a project. For example, right now we're doing a very, very technical project that involves a lot of collaborating between myself, the director, and the DP. So I've been on shoots for the last 3 days. Pretty crazy, but I'm on shoot a lot. I put all the teams together on my projects. So if you were to work on the mill, how you land on my projects, because I wanted you to be part of the project. I am part of both hiring and interviewing artists. So I hire all the modeling, texturing artists that come through the mill. I also do the interview process. So if you guys apply, if you guys are in the modeling, texturing, looked up in lighting, chances are you will have an interview with myself. I also bid my own projects. So that means that I work from the early stages when a client comes and say, hey, what is this going to cost? So I look at the treatments, I break everything down, and I say, this is how much this is going to cost you to do. I'm also part of the 3D Mill board, just like any other board in any other company. We're a group of 5 board members, and we all kind of dictate, decide, and make certain decisions for the mill department, for the mill 3D department. I manage all the quality and all the assets that come through the office. So that means that I maintain the quality of the models. So I'm involved in a lot of reviews, a lot of dailies. People send me stuff to look at models. I approve about 90% of the models. 10% is when I don't have time to look at something. Somebody else has to approve it, or the other lead has to approve them, which is also why we maintain the level of the quality at the mill. If you look at all models, pretty exceptional. I mean, we really push the bar into quality. Quality is kind of the mill brand, is what we call it. We call it the mill touch, which is quality. We always push the bar to make sure that everything we do with animation, with modeling, with texturing, with look dev, the whole 9 yards of visual effects at the mill, we always give it the mill touch, which is always quality. In order for that to happen, we need people to approve these levels of quality. For me, I do all the models and all the texturing that comes through the door. Is I got to maintain that quality level, which goes into the dailies for all these reviews. I'm in constant dailies every day. Every day I'll probably do about 3-4 dailies. That's not my jobs. This is other jobs that are running through the office. As an artist, I am both hard surface and character modeler. Digital sculpting for everything and anything there is to digitally sculpt. I'm both hard surface and character texture as well. I do look dev and shading, and I also do lighting and rendering, and that's kind of my forte as a whole. At heart, texturing is probably the pickiest area that I'm involved in, just because texturing sets the tone to everything. Makes the model look good, makes the look dev look good, makes the lighting look good. If you have really crappy textures, no matter how good the model is, the model will suffer. The look dev will suffer. The lighting will suffer. And I guess my next thing will be modeling. When I first started, that's what I wanted to do, was purely model. I wanted to learn hard surface. I wanted to do characters at the time. ZBrush was not out yet, so I had to do everything by hand. Maybe at the end I'll show you guys my college reel, because I showed it last Saturday, and it was interesting because it'd been like 6-7 years before I had even seen my own reel. It's still on YouTube. And everything, I kind of really pushed myself to become a really great model and a really great texture artist. So let's get into what we are going to view today. So hold on, how do I exit? Let's go ahead and close a few things, and let's get started into what we are going to learn today. So today we are going to learn about materials. How many of you here want to do look dev and shading? Okay, a few handful. is there, just so I understand, you guys have a material class, right? Like, they go through materials? Okay. So one of the reasons why I wanted to do this is, as many of you know, I come here quite a lot, and it's because I have a really strong relationship with Miss Kati. So through the years, we stayed in touch. She was one of my favorite teachers, as I'm sure she's some of you guys' favorite teachers. She's very, very awesome. So I've stayed in touch with her. I typically don't do this because I have a very, very busy schedule. But I do take my time for her because we get in conversations of how to help. I feel that the work that I've seen here has not been the best, which is why the rate of getting hiring is very, very hard. Last week I explained that in my 10 years in my career, pretty much out of all the classmates that I either graduated with or within that 2-year gap, I haven't come across any of them at any point. It's 10 years, so I haven't seen any of them that have made it into this industry. So the rate is very, very low. And I think a lot of that has to do with, I guess, how certain things are presented or how certain things are taught, or how you guys are understanding certain things. So what I've done is, try to help out Ms. Kati, welcome, and basically take my time to kind of show you guys some of the things to help you improve. One of the things that I see is shading and looked at. I don't think the understanding is quite there. A lot of the looked at materials really hurt you guys' demo reels. So what I want to do is kind of give you a different way of thinking about things. And we're not going to sit here and talk about all the materials because there's not enough time, but we are going to go ahead and cover 3 of the basic materials that are on your everyday lives, which is rubber, wood, and metal. These are kind of 3 components or 3 materials that you see pretty much on every day. You're at home, you're at the office, you're here, it's everywhere. So what I want to do is I'm going to give you a perspective of physical, how it works, and how that material information translates into the shader. So, what is looked at? Somebody explain to me what looked at is? No? Okay.
Almost like dissecting something.
Well, no. So looked at is a process in the pipeline that sets the material and look of this specific asset. So if you're creating a robot, you break it down into, okay, this has metals, this has wires, which are plastics, there's glass on this, and basically you're taking the model, you're taking the textures, and you're using shaders to create the look at, making it look real. So this is the stage where you make it look physically real. This is a very, very, very important and crucial area of the pipeline at the mill, where if the look depth sucks, everything is going to suck. It's just because it brings everything together. So the look depth is very important, and usually to be a look dev artist straight out of college probably will not happen. Look dev is put to really a lot of senior artists that have been doing it for a long time. They have a really clear understanding of what a material looks like, because it is the foundation of making it look real. There is a lot of people think that lighting is what makes it look real. And yes, it does to a certain extent, but it's driven by the look depth. Look depth is what makes it look physically real. Your shader, how you're adding, can you read the skin? Does the skin look real? Does the metal look real? Does it look physically real? And it's not so much lighting, it's once you have the look depth, then you take all those shaders and your assets, then you bring it into a real world environment, a real physically lit environment that we do on a daily basis. We're known for a very photoreal aspect of CG, and I think everything is now. Now we live in an era where everything looks good. He asked right now, is that deer CG? And now we're questioning everything. Was that CG? Man, I can't tell. I can't tell. And that is because of the look depth stage. Because we make things look physically correct. We take things and make them look really, really good. And that is why it's so important. So now, understanding these materials. So what is a material? You know, it's a broad term for the substance or a mixture of substances that constitute a thing. And that thing is, again, plastic. This Wacom tablet is plastic, but it's got shiny, you know, there's breakup, there's all kinds of things that's happening in every material. So today, we're going to go over the types of physical materials such as wood. Oh, sorry, before I get ahead of myself. Types of physical materials, we have wood, metal, rubber, glass, paint. You know, those are kind of the basis of everything that's built. Then there's elements like, okay, here's a piece of metal, but then it's been painted on. So ideally there you have two materials. You have the raw metal that sits underneath. It's like thinking about, okay, what sits underneath that metal? If it's a chrome metal, or is it a rough metal? And then you paint it on. So there's two materials right there. And then there's materials that contain color versus solids. Let's see here, take a nice baggie of goodies that I brought. Let's see. So if I were to look at these two things, we have a plastic and a metal. Now, on these two, you know, when we look at this and ask ourselves, color versus solids, what would this be? Would this be a color, or would this be a solid?
Solid.
Great. And what about this one?
Color.
Great. But it's also a solid because it's pure. This already has a foundation of pure plastic, is also a solid. So what I'm getting into is being to identify materials, and that's where it starts with. That's where the thinking of how to build a material starts with. It's like, okay, when I process a material, I break it down to every little step. And I think that's where the teaching gets lost into how to explain and how to understand materials. And for me, when I first started to look at it, it was like, I was so confused about everything. And you know, the way you achieve things, you know, you hit corners where you're like, you're trying to create, for example, a metal, and you can't get there. And you're like, why is this not looking? Well, what I came to find out is, and this is the way I teach it, is because this is how I came to learning it, and it helped me. And I've taught this way to many, many students, and they've all been really successful, so I think it's working, and this is how I'm teaching it to you guys. But the way I started analyzing it was breaking it down by components. Every material that exists is built up of elements. And these material components or elements are broken down by diffuse, specular, roughness, Fresnel, and isotropy. Now, all these components doesn't build up this plastic, or all these components doesn't build up this metal. So each material consists of different components or different numbers that go into different components, and then when they're all kind of balanced, you get a metal, you get wood, you get plastics, you get rubber, you get shiny rubber, you get rough rubber, you get, you know. So everything from diffuse, specular, there's a range, and we're about to really get into that. And every range in the world of CG is literally 0 to 1. It either has diffuse or it doesn't. It's either really specky or has no speck. It's either really rough or no roughness. So we have a, can I get a little, is it on there?
Oh, no, it's on.
Oh, there it is. Yeah. So everything 0 to 1. And in the world of CG, every component is built that way. Doesn't matter what shader you're using, doesn't matter if it's V-Ray, doesn't matter if it's Arnold, if it's Mentoray, it's all the same. Developers have just named them differently. So what we're going to talk about today is breaking it down physically, and then we're going to look at these materials in, I think today we have Mentor Ray. I haven't touched Mentor Ray in like 7 years, so this will be interesting. But it's all the same. It is literally the same. And I'm sure you guys have gotten conversations of like, oh, V-Ray's better or Mentor Ray's better. Hopefully nobody says that. Or Arnold's better. And they all have the goods and the bads. But in the means of look dev, it's all the same. They all do exactly the same thing, and you can get the same outcome in every single package. The only difference is that the math is a little different in each one. Some of them is a little bit faster, some a little slower. Problems that I came across, I know V-Ray processes shiny metal is really good, and Mentor Ray does really good at like glass. It's really amazing at that. I think on Transformers, on the second one, I think, where they have that big building where it exploded and there's crap everywhere, they specifically use Mentor Ray for the glass because it is fast. Doesn't determine the outcome because you can get the same look in any package. It was more, they decided to go with Mentor Ray for that sequence because the math behind Mentor Ray and how it rendered glass was much faster. And that's really the differences between each software. But to get metal and to get plastic is essentially the same in any package because it's all based on these components. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about understanding these physical materials. So first, let's talk about metal. So when we're looking at pure metal, is there color in here? How many say color? How many say no color? Great. Yes and no. Depends on what metal you're using. If I'm looking at this metal, no color. This would be defined as there is no color. This is pure reflection. It's 100% reflective. This is the weight of the metal. There is absolutely no color in here. There can be. There can be color weight in the sense of if I'm looking at, for example, these glasses, the gold trim on this. Now, this obviously has some color in it. Now, here's a question between these two. If I'm looking at a shader and I'm plugging it into a diffuse, if we're saying, okay, this is 100%, would I be plugging any color information into that diffuse value? No, absolutely not. Will I be plugging any diffuse color into the shader if I want to create this metal trim? No, absolutely not. Again, we're talking about pure, right? So what makes this different? What makes this different than this? So both of these have no diffuse color, but this one has a little bit of gold. It is gold. So where's the diffuse, where is that color coming from? Well, one thing that I said is metal. This is very reflective metal, so that means that that specular value is really high. Now, this is where you can tint the specular value. This is where now the diffuse color drives through the reflection, or the spec is what we call it. The terms in the industry is spec. Spec is reflectivity. So I'm going to say spec a lot because I don't use reflection. So the spec has yellow in it, which creates gold. Bronze would be red or reddish, and then there's that darker bronze and so on. So now we've concluded that both of these metals are driven pretty much the same. Both of them have no diffuse color, so you wouldn't plug any textures into that. Then you go to your specular component, and the specular component is direct and indirect reflections, which can be made glossy. So this is saying that, where's that? So right now, if I'm looking at the, if I'm making the metal, automatically the fuse would be at 0. The spec on the metal would be 1 because it is solid. It's 100% reflective. For the gold, would also be 1, but we're gonna add specular diffuse to then create gold. Does everybody follow that? So it's the basis of just 2 components that we talked about, the fuse and spec. Now, let's pull up a different object since we're going to break down. I guess rubber and plastic would go hand in hand. This rubber's too small. It's fine. We'll talk about plastic. So now, if we go back to this black plastic, so if I'm going to create this black plastic, in my diffuse, would I plug in a texture or set a color?
Set a color.
Great. What color?
Black.
Great. Black. One quick note to think about this, and one quick note that you guys should write down is when you're dealing with color in the world of visual effects, nothing is solid. That means that your white should never be 1 and your black should never be 0. It's a big no-no. And I'm not going to get too much into that, but what that does is when you process a texture, and let's say you have it at just at 0 black, and I take it and I'm looked at in it, and there's black areas, right? So you have black that you painted because for some reason it needs to be black.
Oh, alphas.
Huh?
Sorry.
So that black value, if it's at 0, what's going to happen is, let's say overall I need to do an adjustment to it, or I need to set the value higher or lower. What's going to happen to that black is going to get crunched into the negatives or positives. You don't want that because then that causes nans. Then you're going to have these crazy render times, and because now what's happening is it's processing this data of this range of black that's just outrageous. And then somebody's going to come back and be like, why did you set it to solid black? So for future reference, nothing is 0, nothing's pure white, nothing's solid black. Only time you will use solid black and solid white is if you're using an alpha channel. It is the only time that is when you should use it. And you need to make sure it is, like if you're just doing an outline, make sure that outline is either white or black, because then what happens if you have it just a little bit over, guess what's happening? It's causing transparency. So that means you're going to get some of that masking bled in. So you definitely don't want to do that. Okay, great. So now let me jump right back into talking about. So we agreed. We would either put a black texture or a black color picker from whatever renderer you're using. Great. So we're starting off great. Specular. Now, give me some guesses. And Serge, you can answer this one, because you know. Oops. All right. So, 0 to 1. Whoa. From 0 to 1, can somebody tell me the spec weight on this?
3-ish.
5, 0.6.
0.6? Who said 0.6? Too high. 0.2 closer. 0.1. It's a good guess. He said, so it'd be somewhere like 0.1. It's a good guess. Here's the other thing is, and the way to see that, where's my notes right here, is, the way to think about it is, again, we're not looking at color, we're looking at the reflection difference, okay? We're looking at just pure spec. And what I want to try to do today is get you guys to thinking in how to break it down. Not thinking about diffuse, not thinking about roughness, not thinking of subsurface, none of that. This is literally thinking in components. This is what's going to really help you understand physical materials, is being able to look at something. You know, over my career, like, I've done so many looked at assets that I can literally look at something and put it pretty close. Like, just put a shader, I can have a pretty good material in like a few seconds, drop it in, look at it, it already looks like it. Then it's about the next level, just finessing, fine-tuning, adding this texture, taking it up or down. Sometimes when I'm doing a texturing and I'll give certain values to look dev artists and they plug it in and they're like, oh my God, it worked. Well, yeah. But that's where you guys want to be. So you guys want to be able to identify this thing, you know, and identifying is being able to see this and just purely look at the reflection. Obviously, this is pure, this is 100%, this is 1. This is solid. In comparison, you can see the reflections is really, really, really low in comparison to this. Now, when you're looking at shaders, it's different. That 0.1 is very different from, let's say, an Arnold shader and a V-Ray shader because of the math. So that's another part of the issue is that is then understanding the material, what that actual value. You know it's low, and also another good thing to think about is just think of it in brackets. Is it in the lower end? Is it in the middle area? Or is it in the higher end of reflection? Because I can go into V-Ray and set it at like, let's say I say 0.1. And 0.1 is really close because whoever said 0.1 is close because that's closer to an Arnold shape. So for me, I was like, okay, great, that makes a lot more sense because that's actually how I would start, just by seeing this is actually at 0.1. But if I go into V-Ray, it may not, it may be 0.3 or 0.4, you know, and that's the difference between, again, the math behind these shaders. But it's still in the lower end, you know, so the idea is still the same, it's just a little different in each package, and it's about figuring that out. So when you're doing look dev, you know, some of you may work at this company, then go to that company, and at this company you use Mentoray, and at this company you're using Arnold, then you just got to adjust. But the thought process of like comparing these values is still kind of the same. You just got to understand the shader. We'll get into that later on today. Okay, great. So now let's take a look at this piece of wood. Okay. So diffuse? Yes? No?
Yeah.
Great. Solid wood, yes. But when you're driving into CG, you download a texture, right? Plug it into your textures. Now, making wood is pretty easy. It's like some of the easiest things you can do. Because it's almost all there for you. So we say, okay, this has a solid diffuse. Now, no, I won't get into that just yet. So okay, so we're in diffuse. Great, so you plugged in a texture into the diffuse, obviously wood texture. Now, does this have spec? Yes or no?
Almost nothing.
Who said yes? It does. Definitely does. Some areas don't though. So this is not when we start getting the step of dealing with texture stuff. You know, these pieces are solids, all right? Everything's kind of very uniformly the same. But then we get into components like wood and rust and bark. We get into things like paint to metal or stuff like this. When there's like breakup, there's tons of things everywhere. But hopefully this will in the future will help you understand how to get there. So there is definitely spec here, and when I first look at it, it's very, very, very low. It's very, very low. Very little bit in certain areas. Certain areas are quite flat than others. So then this is where you create a spec map. And a spec map will determine the areas and the values that have 0 to 1. This is now your value map, your spec map. So what typically happens is somebody will grab this wood texture, take it into Photoshop, desaturate it, and crank it, which is black and white. That's completely incorrect. and I think that's what people like. Then you have this weird looking turntable and you're just questioning like, what is that person doing? It does not look like wood. Yes, it has a wood texture, but then it's all about the areas that it has it. So creating this is, yes, I would take this texture map and take it into Photoshop, but I'd be very careful, and this is where I spend a little time in Photoshop, balancing values. And again, staying within the range of 0 to 1. Nothing should go higher than that or lower than that. Again, it causes overexposed ranges or underexposed ranges, and that's kind of what you don't want to get into. So the way to think about it is always stay between a range of 0 to 1. So when I take this into Photoshop and I'm creating a spec, now studying this, again, as a whole, it's very low. So the first thing to think about when you're doing something like a wood is like, okay, as a whole, it's really, really, really low. So then as a whole, I'm gonna set my range to like, let's do so we know that plastic right now, we're just saying it's 0.1, right? So this is 0.1. So this one's even less, right? So then I gotta look at this and say, okay, just as a general, it's like maybe 0.05. For now, let's just say 0.05. So that means that when I'm desaturating and I'm setting a value, as a whole, nothing should go higher than 0.05, because then it's going to look too specky. Then it looks like, either very shiny or whatever. And this again, I'm trying to replicate this guy in CG. So my range as a whole needs to stay within this range. And that means that now you have a small range, whether certain areas either have none, and then some areas have a little bit. And it's kind of hard to see unless you guys are really looking at it, and you can kind of see where the spec values hit. And because it is a texture, everything is going to derive from this texture. So then it's about spending the time and making sure that some of these values look right. And you can see where, let's say for example, it's hard for you guys to see, but in between the brown lines, I'm seeing a little bit of speck when I go through the light. I can see the speck hitting. And then here, it's almost the opposite, where I'm getting the lines catching a little bit of speck. So then it's about studying and making sure that the map is catching some good values here, a little less here because it's more here based on how I'm kind of studying and looking at what that wood is doing. And some of you guys, when we take a break, you can look at this and just even where I'm standing at, like if I look at this way, it looks very kind of even. But when I look at here and I'm getting the speck hits from this onto here, I can see exactly where the spec value is higher and where it's less. And during next break, some of you guys come up if you guys want to see that. And that also is how your map gets broken up. There's areas that are really rough between that surface. That's not necessarily coming from the texture. It's coming from the surface, the bump, the displacement, which we'll get into a little bit later. But as a map, is I'm saying, okay, if I have, this is my wood. I'm saying, okay, I'm gonna do a map where maybe this area has spec value and this area has no spec value. These are some of the areas or the components about texturing that is going to make you really, really good. If you can understand that and how to set those breakup ups, you can make some materials look really, really good. And just because, and here's another problem, when you're doing look dev or when you're setting up a material, some people will do look dev in one angle. Why turntables are important. Now, I've worked with a lot of students, and when people are working on their demo reels, there's this thing where it's like, oh, turntables, they're not that great. I completely disagree. Completely. We do turntables every day for clients. Every day. Why? Because it showcases the quality in the asset. Portfolios showcases that you know what you're doing, or you're not knowing what you're doing. When you turn something and you have a light rig, there's lights, there's things that are bouncing. In certain angles, you will see certain details in other angles. So when you are doing look dev, another note to write down is never work in one angle. So if I have my camera and I'm rendering, if I stay here all the time and I'm basing it up this angle, I guarantee you that this turntable or this look dev is not going to look great because there's all kinds of issues because you're basing it off just one angle. You need to see it turn. You need to analyze it and see it. Is that spec weight correct? Ooh, that looks wrong. When I do turntables and when I'm doing look dev, I do about, typically, once I'm done from beginning to end, I mean this car, when I did this car, when I did the materials and looked at for this 68 Camaro, I did about 15 turntables before I was happy. That means that I did some setups, send it to the farm, render it, did a full 360 turntable so I can see and make sure that some of the highlights and everything is acting the way it should physically. Not based off just one angle. And I think that's another area that a lot of artists tend to do is that they stick to one angle, they're like, oh, this looks great, okay, cool. And then there's an animation or rendering, you're like, what? Why is that spec so hot? Well, because you focused on here and you didn't realize that certain areas were getting really, really hot. To my explanation of why, if I look at it here, it looks very flat, but then I'm looking at here, I can definitely see where that breakup is happening. Because now there's this big heat of wave, and if I do a turntable, I can see it, and I can see where certain things are hitting, where certain things are not. So it's always a good thing to note is to always look at different views, different angles, rotate the light, move this, move around, and that's why we create light rigs, look dev light rigs, where we do turntables for specific environments. So, did everybody follow me with the wood? Mm-hmm. Great. Shall we take a 10-minute break right now? And then we'll get into a little bit more details. I think everybody's back. So one thing I forgot to show you guys is, real quickly, for next week, just to kind of drive today into next week, and so everybody's clear on what my workshop is about next week. So ideally, it is this. It is how to present your work. I will be showing you guys how to set up a light rig where you can do a pretty presentation for your portfolios. Now this light rig is very useful, will be useful for pretty much anybody. If you're an effects artist, you want to show some effects, it's a great light rig. I see a lot of effect stuff that looks very, very terrible. It's presented very ugly, it just gets tossed away. If you're an animator, the play blast stuff is always really nice, it's okay, but think bigger, think step ahead. Presentation goes a long way when somebody's viewing your portfolio. If you're an animator, you're showing it some pretty lighting, it's nice to see that. Modelers, look dev artists, this is essential for you guys. What makes a terrible model is a terrible presentation. And I think this is where a lot of you guys that are modelers or texture artists or look dev would highly suggest you come into the workshop next week, because I'm hoping you guys can learn some stuff so your portfolios can look a lot nicer than what they sometimes kind of look like right now. And then this will help you guys. And this is kind of the idea, is just a setup to highlight and present your work. And we'll go into that. Great. So, going back.
You have 5.
Yeah, I think it's already gone. Oops. That. Great. So we were talking about the fuse and spec, and I think making sense to everybody. Any questions so far? Great. So I'm going to backtrack a little bit and talk about metals, and we're going to talk about one component that I completely forgot to add here. It's essential, which is displacement and normals. Bump, displacement, and normals. And this is an essential element to the surface of your model. It dictates a lot of different things. In a lot of cases, what people do is they'll put on that bump map texture, and one thing again about studying and understanding what a physical material is doing, just because it has a bump, whether it's caved in or caved out, doesn't mean that specular value changes. If you're using a texture map, the crevices are going to be black or darker value, and then if you just desaturate it and use it as a spec map, and you ask yourself, oh my God, why does that scratches look like it's like hot lava or whatever, and it just looks weird because it's not correct. You gotta understand the material. So, if I take this little match right here that is, again, no diffuse, this is 100% reflective. It does have some bump in there. Now, the bump inside of this is still specular amount of 1. It's still very shiny inside of it. Doesn't change. So that means that if you're creating a bump map for this, that lettering that's carved in here should not go in your spec map. Does that make sense? It should only be in the bump. Now there are times where, where the inside or that bump or that displacement carving is different. For example, if I have a painted metal and underneath it, let's say I take this exact thing and I dip it in paint, it dries up, now I have a painted little ranch thing. If I take a knife and carve it and scratch it up, what is it revealing underneath? Great. So that means that your map that you've created, now at this point, because obviously there's paint on top, remember what I said earlier, paint, different material. You got to understand the difference between metal, paint, plastic, and so on. How is it revealing? So that means that the painted top is a different material, different spec value, very different than what's underneath. So when you carve that, you're showing what's underneath. So let's say that just for whatever, let's say that paint spec value is 0.5, and I carve it and I reveal this, and I'm doing a map, what would those scratches be? What would that scratch be? What spec value would that be?
1.
Yes, great. You guys are getting it. Love it. It's good. Exactly. 2 different materials, different spec values. You reveal. You have 1.5 for the glossiness. Now, let's go here. Okay. So now, if I look at this and this looks very different, doesn't it? Can somebody tell me why it looks very different? Here, I'll give it. Here. Look at it and tell me why does it look very different.
This one's got less texture on it, so it's shiny.
No.
The diffuse is different.
No.
The other one has a bump.
Who said that? Yes. this has a bump texture. We're full of scratches. Gotta look at it.
That's what I said. Oh, I said it the opposite way. This
Well,
one has less texture, and so
Well, see, this is where it's confusing. It's the language. When you gotta understand it the way it is. This is, if we're talking about surface, you gotta always speak to bump. It's the surface. It's not a texture. There is a texture that drives the bump, but you gotta talk about the surface. Surface on here is very clean, except the numbers. The surface on here is very scratchy, very, very fine scratches that gives the illusion of the,
it scatters the light.
well, it doesn't scatter the light, it scatters the material. It makes it look like there's roughness in there, which not necessarily, and we'll get into roughness, but well, it's that breakup. So it's that surface breakup that's a main difference. If all the scratches were removed, it'd be very close to this. So when you guys are, again, thinking about how to create something, how to make the look at, how to plug in certain textures, you gotta think about that. What are you trying to look? Are you trying to get this look, or are you trying to get that look? And just of these two components, right now we're only covering diffuse, spec, and now bump. There's three components of a shader, of a physical material. And I'm going to compare both because our materials and our shaders that are created are based off of physical, actual living things. So we can recreate and make them look real, because some people that are geniuses, the math, and they broke it down and they put it into a shader and they said this, and this, based on physical representation is this and that, and does all that.
So are you speaking in terms of what happens to the light, or are you speaking in terms
Remember
of
what I
what
said
the
earlier?
material does
Look
to the
dev
light?
is not about lighting.
So
Look
it's what
dev,
the material's doing to the light that's coming in.
it is being affected by a light, yes. But right now we're only talking about contribution on the shader. This is what the shader is doing physically. The lighting, the environment that it lives in, it's a different stage of how it reflects. Because you can have crappy lighting and this will not look good. Yes, of course. But what I want to get you guys to understand is to see it in a way for just this. Don't worry about the lighting. Don't worry about what this is doing, what that is doing. We're going to look at this physically right now, how we're living, and then we'll digitally get into discussions about lighting. In this case, bump is what makes it look very, very, very different. There is also, let me see if I'm ready. Let's not jump into that yet. Now, another just example is that these two look very similar, don't they? I'm gonna pass this around, and I want you guys to compare, especially this area right here. It's very much the same. It is so, I mean, I'm looking at it around, and I mean, it's almost identical to what is happening. And then just putting these three side by side, you can just clearly see the difference. And the only difference that's doing as a component is the bump map. Only difference. Nothing else will diffuse, no lighting. It's just bump that is causing a major difference of a look. So let's start. So I'm gonna pass it around. Kind of take a look at it and just study it. And that's what I do every day when I'm doing a look dev, is comparing, looking at references, see what is those, what makes a difference, what makes that look very shiny and what doesn't. And that's what I want you guys to think about, is seeing the differences. It's metal, yes, it's 100% pure. Has diffuse, zero diffuse. Does it bump is the next factor. So let me go back to another metal. Is that here? Let's look at this. Okay, let me take a look at, let's look at this little, let's say I modeled this little guy, the plastic. Just, but you guys, can everybody kind of see it? What's that? It's a little plastic little thing. How many materials does this have?
Two.
2. What is it?
The
The label.
the label.
Great. Great. I know it's hard to tell, but just based, let me see how good you guys are catching up by this. So just based on what we talked about, so obviously your diffuse would be 2, right? Or sorry, you have 2 materials, so that means we have a diffuse for the gray and a diffuse for the white. And black for the little numbers and little stuff like that. Can somebody guess what the spec value is for the gray and the white? Actually, you know what? Take a look. Were you here since the beginning? So here. Look at this and tell me. Give me a spec value for the gray and give me a spec value for the white for the label.
0.06. And a 0.05.
Very close, but you're too low. Too low. I gave that around. This one is. Remember when we did the black plastic? Somebody said it was like closer to 0.1. Well, now you've gone to like the wood side of things. Well, now it's like 0.05. You know, so being able to see that is what we got to work on. This is what I really want you guys to see, is being able to see something and just look at that 0 to 1. If I know that metal's 1 and I compare it, where does that range exist? Now you were close on being able to see the difference between here and here. You can kind of see it. It's like as I point this at the light, you can see where it's hotter and where it's not, and it's very, very, very small because again, the label it's a little bit flatter. Now there are some labels that are a lot shinier. I thought I had an example of that because I wanted you guys to see the difference into how one material sits compared to the next one. In this case, they're both very, very similar. I'll pass this around. So you can take a kind of look and really shine it at the light. And you can see that speck down, and you can see the breakup, and you can see kind of it's a very, very, very small difference. But he did good in realizing that there is a slight difference between one or the other, and that is the difference. If you set it the same, it really wouldn't be. Oh, perfect example, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So. Same question. There is a little label here. And now let's see. So can you see this? Can you give me the spec value of the metal and then the plastic? Just give me a range. Do you see this line right here? Okay, cool. So anybody else want to give it a shot?
I'll give it a shot. The spec of the sticker, I'd say probably 0.3 about, and the thing of the metal probably 0.7.
What?
The sticker be 0.3.
Okay. And what the metal?
That'll be around 0.7.
No. So the metal, remember, we talked about this is pure metal.
Yeah.
1. 0.3 is good. It's a good. It's a good read. And I'll pass this around as well. So I don't know if anybody's seen it, but this is a very good example of a very kind of difference and shift. And again, we're not looking at anything else. Only the specular amount. How much spec is it getting from the world? And this, you can clearly see where it's hotter. You can see the lights here, and it's a lot hotter. And then once it hits the label, it goes really, really, really low. It's a good call. 0.3 is a good range, again, depending on the software, but it is on the lower side of things. So it's a good way to look at it. And then, again, this has how many materials?
Well,
Three said 3.
Three.
Well, no. So it is 2. And I see why you guys would say 3, but again, remember, diffuse, right? Diffuse is, this label is like a grayish with black numbers. That's all 1. It's 1 element. And that's where earlier when I was talking about plastics, where is it? You know, wood, metal, rubber, glass, paint as a material. Metal, and this can be like a plastic. Okay, so, and then what's on that surface drives either bump or diffuse. In this case, the numbers, it's part of the diffuse. So yes, it's only two materials.
So would ink, if it's like lithography, would that be another material because it actually has depth to it? I mean, microscopic, but it does have depth to it.
I think I see what you're saying.
Because you'd have metal, plastic, ink.
Yes and no, because in this case, I see, because you're saying that the ink is different. You wouldn't treat it that way because it's a small component, so you got to see it as a whole. You got to see it as the big piece. Now, if I had a project where then we're breaking down this label and we're like a microscopic view, then yes. Then I would break that down into possibly 3 materials.
So if you were doing like an engraved invitation, you wanted to show that ink was sitting on there.
But that's the thing. You got to look at what you're creating. Like there's no bump here. There's a layer that sits on top that's creating the spec value. Underneath is just a pure color of gray and pure color of black. That's it. If we're going and breaking out, like if I'm doing an ad and breaking out the ink, then yes, then that becomes but as a general, no, because it's a diffuse. It's just a color. You got to look at the materials. I'm going to keep saying you got to I'm going to keep going to understanding the materials, because this is what I want you guys to start doing is breaking down these materials, analyzing them, and seeing, okay, this is color, this is not, this is part of a solid, this is just pure black, that's pure gray,
And if it was painted metal?
then that would be paint. There would be a different shader, Now, all of this gets very, very complex. I'm giving you guys a thought process to think about some things, but when you have like, paint and metal and, let's say I take this cup and I throw paint at it, and then I throw dirt at it, and then I throw all this stuff on it, doesn't necessarily mean you're going to end up with like 10 shaders. You're going to end up ideally with 1 shader, but the values, remember I talked about specular maps, is going to drive that. Is going to drive those values. So when you plug that map into a shader, it's going to identify, okay, my paint specular amount is 0.5, the diffuse is red, the dirt is the texture of dirt, and that's diffuse, and then the spec amount is 0.1. So you're determining that map. So once you plug that into the shader, it understands mathematically, okay, it's gonna analyze those values and render it out correctly. Not necessarily you're gonna have 5 different shaders. Now, if it's 5 different pieces, then you would have 5 different shaders. Does that make sense? Kind of. Completely confused. Because the thing about looked up is it does get very in-depth. It can be. Right now we're going very simple to get you guys to understand how to work it. And what I would suggest is that after this workshop, take it in on something small, because you have to start small. You have to start trying to understand and then build. And then when something makes sense, you're like, oh my God, this makes sense. And then if I do this, I'm going to do this. And then that's how I started. And I just went bananas. And I was like, I can create everything and anything. And then there's like layer textures and layer shaders. And you can just do all kinds of craziness. But that craziness matters nothing if you can't understand this, because it will look not great at all. So, and my suggestion for you guys is really try to start small. Take it step by step. Everybody wants to become this great look dev artist in 2 weeks. It doesn't happen that way. You will not. And I guarantee you guys that this takes time to understand. It takes a lot of training. I think even from graduating to I consider myself a really good look dev artist, it was about 5-6 years into it when I was like, okay, I can do anything that they throw my way, and I'm confident I could really understand this. So it took me a long time, and if you guys try to rush in and just do all kinds of crazy, it will not look good. I can guarantee you that. So take it step by step, analyzing. This is why I'm breaking it just We started with diffuse, we start with spec, just so you guys can kind of understand how to build this together. So, moving on. We talked about diffuse, we talked about spec, and we talked about bump. Does this have diffuse?
No. Well, the rest is.
Yes.
Great card. Where is the diffuse coming from?
The rest.
Probably on the rest and
What else?
around the thread.
This is of the yes. Correct. So, we taking same metal, exactly the same metal. Now we've added diffused dirt on this, rust. Inside the crevices, there's like grime. There's lot of blotchy dottiness in between the crevices. A lot of small things that are making it look like this. Now there's also bump in here, and there's also some scratches that reveal the shininess. It's very, very small, but when you play with it and you kind of turn it around, you can see some scratches that reveal some little paints. Because they've been scratched and it's just revealing because of all the stuff that's been built up. And so how do you get from here to getting something like that? Again, it's a component, it's a layer, it's an element. I always like to see things in stages. This, where's the little metal wrench thing? That one, brand new off the shop, shiny, clean. Through time, goes into the shop, there's oil, there's dirt, it sits in the sun, causes rust. But what happens to the specular value?
Decreases.
No. Specular value never decreases because, again, it's pure. Roughness. So this is another component that builds a certain type of metal, a certain type of surface. Controls the glossiness of the specular reflections. So now we've gone from shiny, super, super shiny, in that wrench that we had, and then through time, what happens? The surface gets rough. Grease, oil, touching it. It's gone through this car. It's gone through that car. We used it on this pipe. We used it on that pipe, and through time, it builds diffuse. The specular value still stays pretty high because it's pure, never goes down, because when it goes down, now you're creating a different type of material. This is still metal. But the difference is that there's roughness in here, and the roughness basically is taking the glossiness or something that looks really sharp to really blurry. And that's what's happening here. And the roughness in here is broken up all over the place because certain areas still maintain some of the shininess. So now it's a mix of everything. Now you're mixing in roughness, spec, bump, and diffuse. And then you start getting into this direction. Now you start looking at this, and now you can get a look. You can go from here to here by, again, now plugging in more components to it. And that's kind of the process with the shader. It's plugging in every component that is needed to create that look. So the roughness here, so we said specular is 0 to 1. Now in the world of roughness, and we'll find out mentor because I think mentor is like backwards. So in Arnold and V-Ray, 1, meaning it's white, is complete rough. 0, black, means it has no roughness. So if I'm putting a shader together for that ranch, diffuse would be black because there's no diffuse in it. Specular would be at 1 because it's pure. It's 100% specular. And then obviously I would plug in my bump. And if I wanted to get it to here in roughness, then I would set a value going from 0 to 1. So if it's pure metal, my roughness would be at 0, or black, meaning it has absolutely no roughness, it's super shiny. The second I start take that slider or putting in my numbers, the second I go to 0.5, boom, starts looking like a brushed metal, starts getting into that roughness world. Now this is where you gotta be careful, and this is where it gets tricky, and this is where, when I teach this is where students get confused. This is where I lose them. Because roughness, you know, when I look at this, it looks like there's some roughness, and there is. There's a little bit of roughness in here, but one component that, again, gives you the illusion of roughness as well is bump. How bumpy it is. Is that surface, you know, is it really the surface that's causing it to look like a bump, or is it actual roughness within the material? And I'm going to use this guy as a little bit of an example. This surface right here, it's got a lot of little bumps. There's a surface bumpiness that goes around. And then there's an area where it's less. And it looks like the roughness value and this roughness value is very different. And it may be, but in this particular situation is when the factory build is, it's all built up this plastic. It's this black plastic puddle of plastic. And it's the same, it's all one value. It is 0.4 specular, and the roughness is, let's say, 0.05. So when they build it, they take it into this thing, they put the little ridges, they cut it, they put this thing, and then they surface it. And creates these little bumpies. And then when they put it together, some areas don't get the same surface because of the way the machine works. So you get these little artifacts where it looks cleaner, it looks less, it looks sharper. And that is the illusion of the surface, not necessarily roughness. And this is where it's confusing, because somebody will look at it and be like, oh yeah, that surface is like 0.4 roughness. It's like, no, it's not. It's actually 0.05. It's the bump. It's giving you the illusion of roughness. And this is where it gets very...
polish go in? Like when you polish something, does it go in, does it affect the bump, or does it affect the roughness?
Well, it affects the surface. It shouldn't affect the bump. Like, unless I'm taking off, like if you look at this, is that bumpiness is part of the surface.
Let's say like the wooden stick. I polish it, now it becomes smoother, so now it's more reflective than it was before.
No. I see what you're getting to. Depends on what you're trying to accomplish. Again, this is also a pure object. If I were to scrape this down, it doesn't make it shinier. Again, if you look at it as a whole, remember we said, as a whole, the wood is 0.03 or something as a whole. That's our range. 0, 0.0 to 0.03, as an example. If I were to grab it and I shaved it off, it's not going to make it shinier, because this is pure. This does not get shinier. The way it gets shinier is if I go to Home Depot and I buy a layer of glossy coat, and then I paint it. Now that becomes glossy. I'm adding to it.
Not that kind of polish. Not like painted on polish. I'm talking about sanding it until it's.
Yeah, but it doesn't make it specular. Like it's not going to be shinier because this is pure. It's just going to be a smoother surface. That becomes bump.
Okay, that's fine.
Oh, I thought you were asking the specular value. Sorry. Yeah. Then yes, the surface would be smoother, but doesn't mean that the spec is going to be more or less.
I was asking if it affect roughness or.
Well, it'll affect both.
Oh.
It will affect both. Now, you're leaning into a good question, because if I were to take a sand or or let's take a sand, sandpaper. Yeah, if I take sandpaper and I scrape the hell out of it, yes, that surface will become a little bit smoother, because that's what it's intended to do for wood. The roughness on here, well, your specular would almost go really low, because then it becomes very just soft and almost chalky kind of. And it gets into another world of like other components. Your diffuse roughness gets affected by it. So now that's a different component. I don't have that in there because I didn't want to. That's like what should I say? It's a more experienced route to go into. But there is a component called diffuse roughness. I don't want to confuse you, so I won't go too much into that. But diffuse roughness makes things a little bit more chalkier. It's taking that diffuse and roughing it up or spreading it out where it looks softer. So I won't get too much into it because that's going to confuse a lot of what I'm trying to talk about when I'm saying roughness. Roughness, again, it controls the glossiness of the specular reflection. So we're talking about spec. Roughness and the spec. Does that kind of answer your question, though?
Yeah.
So yeah, so if I sand it down, it's going to get a little softer. If I sand this metal out, or if I take this metal, sand it, what is it going to cause? If I take that sandpaper and just...
Roughness.
No.
Scratch.
Yes.
Because you're effectively affecting the outer shell of the material.
Exactly. Exactly that. I am affecting the surface. I'm not creating roughness. I'm affecting that surface. Now, there are certain materials or certain things where when you scruff it off, it will make that surface rougher. It will. For instance, if I take my cell phone and I take sandpaper and do the same thing, it's going to do the same thing as you talked. It's going to give me bump because now I'm scratching that surface. But what's going to cause is roughness. Now it's taking that glossy material and just blurring it. So, I mean, I'm not going to do that on my phone, but if I should have brought a glass. But if you take plexiglass, for example, just take a sandpaper. It's really shiny, have a reflection, and just go. Feel that surface. First, it was really soft. Feel it. Now you feel the bumpies. Second, that specular value has been roughed up. Now you've added roughness to that material. So when you glance it into light or the environment or outside, you can see where there's these nice sharp reflections, and then there's this roughness to it. Does that make sense? The roughness? So I'm going to take this. Let me see if my hands are not that sweaty yet. Anybody have sweaty hands? No.
That's a sweaty year.
So, okay, here it goes. And you guys can do this to your phone and you can really see this. Now, if you take this, so now here's another way you can use roughness.
Stick it on your forehead.
Oh yeah, that's a good question. There you go. Ah, perfect. So, that worked really well actually, 'cause that's what I wanted to get. Is get a really harsh kind of example. So glass is 100% reflective as well. And I'm not going to break down glass because glass goes very in depth into a lot of things. But if we're just talking about spec, it is 100% reflective. Now, I put this in my forehead, and I didn't break the surface. The surface is still very smooth, having carved it. But because it got the oils and the stuff from my forehead, I've created a roughness map. Now I've created roughness, and you can see why if I travel through the light, and I don't know if you guys can see it,
Yeah.
there's this big thing right here, and it kind of breaks it up. That's roughness. That is roughness right there. Now, if I were to create a map, you create a map that has something like that and some fingerprints, and you use those values. Now you set the value. How rough is that, right? So at that point, for those who can see this, the glass is 100% specular, yeah? Now let's say the roughness around the area is, let's say, 0. There's no roughness. But my forehead, can somebody give me a value from 0 to 1? Remember, 0 is no roughness, 1 is roughness, or 100% roughness. Can somebody give me a ratio?
7 or 8.
Huh?
Probably
Oh, that's way too high.
7.5.
Who's that 0.3? Good, good, good. Roughness, gotta be very careful. Roughness, brackets very high. Very, very, 1 is like, almost like a Lambert, like it just so spread. And those ranges are really high. I really don't know why, but those ranges in almost every shade I've ever used tends to be, bless you, tends to be really, really high. So when you look at it, you gotta take it a step ahead, and it's like, if you think it's 0.6, half it, 0.3. You know, versus how you think about it with specular. With specular values 0 to 1, yes, makes sense. 0, 0.3, 0.2. You know, we talked about low, mid, and high. With roughness, you can take it in the similar approach where you can it's low, medium, and high, but your range has got to be a little bit smaller. Because I've seen that a lot where, you know, I got some of the young guys that start looked at me and that roughness is like, oh my God. I was like, dude, it only needs to be like 0.05, just a little bit. And again, why it dictates that? Turntables. I can see when I look at turntables or I'm reviewing a turntable or I looked up turntable and I'm looking for these kind of things, turntables, again, very important because I can see what's happening. You can see that somebody has a very clear understanding of what that's meant to look like. We never do stills, ever. Never do reviews on stills. It always has to be turntables. But great, 0.3. Yes, I think that's a fair number to start with and kind of giving it. So when you're doing that map and I download some weird shape and I gotta make sure that that value is set there. So I'll go in Photoshop and I'll take that range down. Now, how many people use Nuke? Nuke, great. So I don't use Photoshop much anymore. I kind of only use it for like photographs. Not even photographs anymore. I just use it to like crop stuff. But I use Nuke a lot. Nuke is one of our main compositing tools that we use at the mill. All the look dev lighter guys have to know Nuke. We do all our pre-comps in Nuke. But Nuke has this color picker. Everybody knows, right? You hover over it, gives you some values, gives you your ranges. You can take that map in. If those black values or those white values are ridiculous, you know, take a grade node, grade it down or expose it down to give it a good range. Because what happens is when you plug that, the numbers are going to be so insane that when you plug that in, you know, if that value or that white value is like at 1.3, that roughness is going to be out of control. Then what you end up doing in the shader is adding a multiply divide or a HSV and taking that value way, 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 way down. So again, taking another step of thinking about things is when you're plugging in those maps, if you say, okay, I know that forehead roughness should be 0.3, I found this really cool map that could emulate that, you know, take it into Nuke, see where those values are at, and adjust it based off of that. And then you get closer, you plug that map in, and that math should calculate those values. Should get you a lot closer. So that is kind of what roughness is. So let's look at rubber. Rubber comes in many, I mean, rubber is, there's shiny rubber, there's not. So I'm gonna take a look at, this little piece is like really small. Oh, actually, before I get ahead of myself. So this Wacom tablet's awesome. It's gonna be a great reference. Clean that up. If I look at this, there's a bunch of fingerprints, roughness. I'm gonna clean that out. So it has less roughness around. Okay. We're only gonna talk about this little square right here for 1 second. See how well you guys are picking up. Diffuse?
Yes.
What color?
Or
Not too black.
Give me a value.
80%.
Huh?
80%.
80% black. I like that. It's good. 80%, 50%, 30%. Understanding your range and values is absolutely correct. I'm going to go through, we're going to talk about HSV a little bit later, but speaking in terms is very important to understand what a 50% grade looks like, what an 80% grade looks like, because that's kind of how we talk. When you're in a review, somebody will say, they won't say, oh, bring that down to like 0.35. People will say, you know, we're now, like you said, 80%, 50%, 30%. Should have an idea of what that is, and we'll get into that with HSV. Okay, great. So 80% black. Okay, I'd go a little higher because I want a little bit of that black to pop, but let's go with your 80%. Great. Specular values. Does this need a spec map? By looking at this, would you use a solid specular number, or would you use a map?
met that.
Yes, great. Which, center or outer, which one would have more or less spec?
Less spec on the outside.
More-
On the
it-
outer.
No, it should have all the same.
No. Okay.
Wouldn't roughness make that?
Yes and no.
Because that's
What
just
was that?
where.
What did you say?
There's two different types of specs. There's the gloss on the left.
Okay, yeah, you guys are going in the right direction. So this would need a spec map. The amount that it's getting in the center is definitely a lot more than it is getting here. There is roughness as well. But again, being able to see something and break it apart is the key here. It's being able to understand and looking at this and saying, okay, yes, there is a spec value difference. Remember what I said, bracket, think about sections. Think about everything yet, because then you'll get in this weird loop. As you're learning, later that will make sense. You can see and be like, wait, bam, 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 this needs this isn't. For now, think about it in sections.
See, that's where my question about polish is, because to me that center section is polished because the hand's been wearing that.
But also remember,
polishing.
the spec value is very different from here to here.
And that's why I was wondering, roughness or bump,
But-
what
but-
causes that?
Both. Remember, earlier I said, when I'm done here, everything affects everything. Depends on what you're trying to do. Depends on what you're trying to accommodate. Depends on what asset is given to you and say, gotta look at this. So it's gonna be your job to identify that. What I'm doing is giving you all the components that make it all together. It's everything. It's roughness, it's specular, it's diffuse, it's everything.
The way I'm kind of understanding it is you have, like, if you took it with pristine, brand new, it would have the same amount of spec all over it.
Yes.
Now that it has some wear on it, it has polish, so it makes that center section shinier, but it still has the same amount of same amount of spec, but it has.
No, because again, now you get into a world. Okay, let me see if I could explain this in a way where it'll make sense to you. Okay, so this, if I buy this brand new, the spec value here as a whole, or this thing, let's say it's like, because it is quite low, it's about 0.2. It also has roughness. So the roughness is a little higher because I can tell this area here on the outside is a little bit, I mean, you can compare from here to here. This is zero spec, or zero roughness, and you compare it to that, it looks nothing alike. So that means that roughness value needs to go high. So now you have, let's not look at the center here, let's just look at if this center wasn't there. Then my shader will consist of black for diffuse, specular value at like 0.2, maybe 0.2 sounds more correct, and a roughness value of maybe 0.3 or 0.4 is what I would start at. Now let's get into the next phase of like working, polishes it, it's cleaning it out, it's bringing out. So now, because of this material, that so now you're adding shininess to it, because you're revealing essentially something. Because yes, when you create this material, it came out of the same pot, but then they coated it with something on top. So remember, we're talking about painted metal and what you're revealing under. So now what you're doing here is you're revealing what's underneath this layer of coat. This layer of coat has a higher spec value. If you look at it, this starts getting into the range of this. So now that means that spec value needs to go up because you're revealing what's underneath. Does that make sense? So you're still using both attributes because this still contains some roughness. Because even looking at that surface right here and comparing to that, it's not as tight as it is here. So this still contains some roughness. So again, depending on what you're trying to achieve, depending on what that look is it's a mix of everything. It's a mix of both. Some things have spec, some things have roughness, some don't. Some things, like in this case, you're revealing something underneath that on the top has roughness, but the bottom has less roughness and more specular. Does that make
Yes,
a
so
little bit
can
of sense?
as an artist, can you go from either direction? Can you say, okay, I'm going to say that the shiny part is the base, and then add a map of roughness around it?
Yes, you can do that.
And so then you have one specular, and then you have the roughness that goes around it. Or do it the opposite way and say it's rough.
Or you
and
do
then
both.
Add a shiny to it.
I mean, you do both. This is which is why I asked. Do we create a specular map for this? Yes, we do. We create a map where the value on the outside is the 0.2, and then the value in the middle is 0.3 or 0.4, and that's your spec map. Now I'm going to create a map that's a roughness map. So my roughness here is a lot higher. So my roughness map here would be like 0.4, and then the center would be like a 0.2 or 0.1. Does that make sense? So now I take a shader and I plug in my spec map and I plug in my roughness map, and voila, I get this. But how you get the surface is texturing, is where you have to create a texture map that emulates or that looks like this. Maybe in my next phase, I don't know, maybe down the line, I'll do a workshop where I can break the textures up and you guys get a better understanding of that. But for the sense of this is what you would create. So you would have a map that looks like it. It's just giving it those values from the outside and the inside. Does that make sense? Okay, I want to get into... okay, real quickly, because I want to get down and show you guys on the box. Rubber. Let's do. Somebody give me a. Okay, let's just take this pen real quickly. Do another example. Let's look at this rubber. Let's look at this plastic, and then let's look at that plastic. Now, looking at it, and now let's take it from the top down. The fuse, what would I have? Black, gray, and black. So your map, if I'm creating this and there's a UV for these three little components, it'd be black, gray, black. Nothing else. Now, here's a thing that I want to dive into just for a brief moment is one thing that I see a lot of, and then this drives me insane because it's not accurate. Somebody will say, you know what, let me just photograph this and map it on. It doesn't work that way, because what's happening is you're baking in things. This already has reflections, this has specular roughness, there's dirt, there's scratches. Now you're baking all of that into it, which is why I looked at then you plug in a shader, it looks weird, it's all ugly. It's because of that thing. It's because of that fact. When you take a pen like this, you should never take a photograph of it and then plug it in. It should be, again, you're building up a shader. That's what look dev is about, is being able to build something and understanding what needs a texture and what doesn't. If I'm going to go look for wood, I'm not going to take this thing outside and photograph it when sun's beaming on it. That's why most of the textures get put in a very diffuse, very kind of no lighting or no harsh lighting scenarios, and they're quite flat. And so you use them procedurally or you hand paint them, whatever the case is. So again, take everything in stages. Everything has to be flat. What I always tell my guys is, if you're going to use textures from outside, make sure that there's the least amount of shader information in that texture map. So if you're taking something very shiny, don't use that. When I do metals, or when we do metals, you go to CG Textures or whatever it's called now, or textures.com or whatever. You look at all those metals, and there's like rust, and then there's like these hot areas. I got tossed that right back. You cannot use that because you're using baked-in information. That hot spot is coming from a sun. And when I work with students, it's always the same thing. I'll see something and I shot this, and there's all kinds of information. I'm like, it's not. You're going backwards at that point. The fundamental process of look dev is building a shader, is creating a shader, being able to give it its components to make it look real, and that is what makes it look real. So when you are creating this pen, and I give you say, hey, I need a pen, look dev this, what the first thing you're going to start doing is, because it is solid, you just use black, gray, solid, just pure color, picker, boom, picker, pill. Now I get into specular. So again, I set my colors up. So now I got to identify spec. So for this rubber, somebody give me a spec value.
I think 1.
Okay, good. Give me the plastic, the gray. And that's hard to see because it's like really tiny, but
0.2.
but just as I mean, it's even from a distance you can kind of see. Huh?
0.23.
Too high. I'd go with 0.3. What about the top one, the black?
Can't see it.
It's very similar. Just so okay. So now we have a spec map of, what do we say? 0.2 for the rubber, 0.3 for the plastics. Just roll with that. Now I'm going to plug in a roughness map. What would the roughness map be on the rubber?
0.2.
0.1.
0.1 sounds pretty good. What about this guy, the silver one?
0.4.
Who said 0.4?
Right.
Good call. It is a lot higher, but maybe 0.4 is a little too high depending on the shader you're using. But yes, there's a very big difference into the roughness here and here. And then when you look at the tip's a lot tighter, so that roughness is low. So now again, you created two maps. You have a spec map determining how much spec this is getting, how much spec that is getting, how much spec that is getting. And you're doing another map, breaking down what roughness this has, what roughness that has, and what roughness that has. Gets you a step closer to physical reality. All my young students and all the guys at work that are coming in as juniors wanting to get into look dev and lighting, you know, they come to me and they're like, what do you suggest? What can I do to really be good at this? And what I say, and it's something that I talked about last week, if you guys were in my workshop, and for you, those that were not, I talked about, I've been doing this for 10 years, and still to this day, I'm outside, I'm driving, I'm looking, and I'm like instantly picturing in my head how I would model that, how I would texture that. I'm like, oh, that point this and point value of that, point that, and I'm already picturing the turntable in my head. And my suggestion to everybody that wants to really get into look dev and lighting is study, 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 like anything. If you want to be a great sculptor, sculpting, sculpting, sculpting. If you want to be a great texture artist, texture, texture, texture. If you want a great modeler, model everything. That's how you're going to get good. It's developing the craft. Same thing with look dev. Developing the craft is studying. It's physical reality. Is being able to understand every component for this door, every component for that wall, the thing on the top, glass. It's being able to understand that. And this is basically the essentials of it. Is being able to identify that and be like, okay, that spec value is really low. Okay, it's 0.2. And then when you're doing it and when you're translating it into CG, it's going to just make more and more sense because now you know what you're trying to achieve based off the essential materials that exist in real life: wood, metal, rubber, glass, paint. There's nothing like magic or something that nobody knows. I mean, a material is a material. It's everyday life. It's all plastics. It's all rubbers and wood and all that stuff. So. Great. Let's look at this guy really quickly. I think you guys are getting it for the most part. Any questions so far? I mean, please feel free. If you guys have any questions at any point, like, there's literally, ask anything. I would try my best to answer. So this little guy, the fuse, color, what color would it be? Would you take a picture of this? Use it as a texture. Great.
Blue-green?
Great. It'll be some kind of green. Great, great, great. There's another piece of texture that you would add to this. What would it be? It's really tiny. The lettering. It's the black letters. So that's all part of it. Now, what's the spec value?
coating itself, I would say 0.78.
Right.
It's really shiny.
So you're saying that 0.7 to 1 is very close.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
what I mean. Gotta look at the difference. The ranges. Remember we talked about 0 to 1.
This would be like 4.
Well, now you're in the now. It's a much better answer. Because again, if you're saying, like you said, 0.7, that's really close to 1. So that's saying that that spec should be as glossy as this, but it's not. So again, when you think of something, compare it always to metal. I always like to say compare it to metal because this is 1. If it's way off, that means that your value is really low. If I compare, spec of this and spec of that, spec value here is like extremely low. It's a huge difference. Does this have roughness?
Yes, it does.
Give me a value.
Point. 1 is rough,
One is rough.
so 0.1.
Go a little lower than that. It's very, very small, very subtle. This is a very, very subtle, just because I can see the sharpness and the reflections. So it tells me there is a little bit of roughness, very, very little. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Fresnel. Somebody tell me what Fresnel is. Does anybody know what Fresnel is?
Reflection level is dependent on the viewing angle of this.
Good job.
You can read too.
Oh.
Specific
Yes.
answer, huh?
Very good. I was like,
Something you would have said, wouldn't it?
yeah, I was like, wow. Great. So just in the top, based on what you or may not know or do know, Fresnel, like everything else, runs from a range from 0 to 1. It's a range. Every component is a range. Fresnel works the same way. Now, Fresnel, does every object have Fresnel?
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes, it does. And now this is another piece that plugs everything together. Fresnel exists everywhere. So for example, glass or a mirror. This mirror right here, as a guess, would you think, would this have Fresnel? Yes or no?
Yeah.
Yeah. High or low? High. No, it's very, very low. Because you read this, it's depending on the viewing angle of the surface.
So it'd be a different answer for everybody.
Well, yes and no. You can move anywhere. Mirror is mirror. I can see it from here. I can see it from there. I move this way. It's 100% reflective. It's pure reflection. So the Fresnel in here would actually be almost 0. This would almost have no Fresnel.
So would the bevel create a Fresnel?
No. It's glass.
No, but the highlight on the edge of
That's
the bevel.
just the specular highlight.
Okay.
A Fresnel is a glancing. So what a Fresnel does is that at certain angles, you can look at it like for example, paint job has a very high Fresnel. Certain plastics have a high Fresnel. Metals. Would have certain angles. So the way to look at it is like, if I look at think of oh my God, just like a bubble, right? Like throw bubbles in the air. Certain areas looks really thin, right? That's Fresnel. That's a glancing angle. That means that at certain angles you're going to see more reflection than others. The specular value is still the same. It still has the same amount. So if it's a 0.7, it's a 0.7. But what a Fresnel does, it gives you a viewing angle where in that bubble, even though it's completely circular, at certain areas, if I rotate this way, it will consistently stay towards the top, depending on lighting and reflection. If I'm looking at it from the bottom, I'm going to see it kind of at the bottom is going to kind of lose. It's going to emulate like if it's losing specular because it's not 100% now. Now, if I take that same sphere and give it a chrome or a mirror, no matter where I look at it, I see reflection. Does that make sense? So cars have that. Cars have Fresnel. Certain angles it's less than others, or it'll look like there's no specular, but there is. It's just the Fresnel. It's just the way that material's reacting to it. So then it's also understanding that. And Fresnel exists, you know, I mean, Fresnel's, I think it's kind of easy in the sense that, you know, vehicle has Fresnel. You know, bubbles have Fresnels. I mean, there's, let me see what other things. You know, some plastics have Fresnels. And mostly everything is just, again, the range of what you're trying to emulate. It's higher on others than if I'm creating this glass or this plastic, my Fresnel values would probably be lower in the range. This one, I would almost use very low Fresnel. It's not really, you know, the spec is really low, and yes, at certain angles, but it's not heavy enough. So don't get too caught up with the Fresnel. Really focus on the Fresnel when you're dealing with metals or where you're dealing with bubbles, if you're doing bubbles. That's always a good example. Anisotropy. Now that is a very specific look. Doesn't mean you need to use this all the time. Can I, not reading this, but can somebody explain to me how you would use that?
Be satin surfaces.
Good. Very good. Yes. Satin surfaces. Again, very specific surfaces. This, will never use it at all. It is there because it is another component based on a material. So when you're looking at your shader and this comes along, you're like, oh my God, let me just turn it on. And you're like, whoa, this looks so weird. Because it's only made to be used on very specific elements, clothing, satin. When you get little ornaments for Christmas, you know, sometimes it causes this weird spiral kind of specular thing that's happening. It comes from this, and you can control the rotations of it. You know, you can do vertical, horizontal, and it rotates, and you can get these nice looks. Same thing with satin. Satin has, see, satin is everything. It's all of this. It will have the fuse, right? If I have a red satin, it will definitely have the fuse. It will drive its specular based off that little bumps that it causes because of the cloth. You know, it does have roughness. It's like thinking microscopically, how much roughness does it have? Yes, it has roughness, but then that roughness, or to get that look, is driven by this as well. So then now you're balancing everything. So now you're at a point where you have a material that's almost using all of these components, and now it's a balance. Now you're doing look depth. Now you're full into look depth. You're taking down the specular, you're adjusting the roughness a little bit, you're changing the rotation on the anisotropy until you finally get that look. So when I see that turntable, I'm like, great, that looks good. Or I say, oh, maybe rotate this by 30% so we can get a little bit more of that action as it turns around, and you can get that light that's hitting that spec that causes that. You know, so now you're dealing with every component. So ideally, that is looked at, is taking all these components that build up physical materials. And we're going to get into Maya right now, and I'm going to set this up, and we're going to look at creating metal rubber wood in a very simple way, going over everything I just talked about, so you guys can physically see it digitally, and creating a simple metal, a simple rubber, and a simple wood. Let's take a 10-minute break. All right, so let's get into the world of CG. Anybody have any questions before I get ahead of myself? No questions? So everybody understands this 100%?
We're experts.
Everybody's experts. All right. So earlier I talked about, so now that we kind of went through diffuse, specular, roughness, Fresnel, and I said every shader, or every, doesn't matter if it's Monterey, if it's Arnold, V-Ray, those attributes all exist in that shader. There's nothing different. It's just named a little different because they want to be different, and the math works a little bit different. I can create the same exact chrome metal, and it will look exactly the same, and render it in Monterey, V-Ray, or Arnold. Doesn't matter. So if we look at V-Ray here, here's your diffuse. So you have a texture, you plug it in there. They call it reflection. So in here, you would put in your reflection color. So in this case, if you were doing gold or something, you would put more of a yellow. Now, reflection glossiness is where your roughness would go. So this is just how they name it. I don't really know why. The language from each one to each one's a little different, but reflection glossiness is your value right there. Now, your reflection right there, right now, it's at white, meaning that it's 100%. So sometimes you, at certain, again, depends on what you're using. Some of them will have ranges, some will have colors. Still the same thing. White is 1, black is 0. It's still a value. Doesn't matter. So if you see it, you're like, oh my God, there's no slider. Just change it to black if it's not supposed to be reflective. Glossiness right here. Now there's a value there. There's a 1. Means that it's, it's so here's where some of these go backwards. So now, or it's still kind of the same, but glossiness at 1 means that it's super sharp, and V-Ray is backwards. So sorry. In V-Ray is backwards. So 1 would be completely tight, and you go lower, becomes rougher. Why they do that, I don't know. Again, they try to be different amongst each one of them, but it's still a range. So whether it's backwards, whether 0 is rough or 1 is rough, depending on the package you're using, it's still a range, so it doesn't change that. Refraction's more for glass. And that's kind of, and then there you go. There's your main components that we've been using. Let me go into Arnold. So this is what Arnold looks like. This is what we use. So here's your diffuse. Here you have where you would plug in your diffuse color. This gets into weight, and I'm not going to get too much, but it's like, is it 100% diffuse or is it 50% diffuse? So this is where you'll start seeing a lot more slight attributes that it gets to it. Then there's a roughness based on that color. Again, it's one of those things where it depends on what you're trying to do. If I'm doing a metal, this would be black. That weight would be 1 because it's solid. There's nothing to adjust. And typically, we don't mess with this a whole lot because you're texturing it. If something's textured, you're texturing it to look how it needs to look. So there's no like, hey, let me bring the weight down or whatnot. Then we get into our specular tab. Here's your color. It's white, meaning it's white. That's chrome. Add yellow tint. I'm getting into gold. And then the weight. And the weight means, is it 100%? Is it 0%? Does it have, is it 0.2? Is it 0.1? Is it 0.3? Now here's your slider. So here's where you slide from 0 to 1. Metal, if it's completely spec, goes to 1, 100% specular. Then I have my roughness tab. You know, how rough is that?
So is weight like opaqueness?
No,
Color?
no, there's no opaque. Remember, value. We're talking only strictly value
Well,
from
of
0
the-
to 1.
I'm talking about, you have a white specular, and so you say instead of 100%, it's 50%, so that would make it a
No.
green
So
kind
here's
of
your
design.
specular color, meaning this is, remember we were asking if I wanted to do gold. I would say some of these have a specular diffuse that you plug it into. That's all that is. White is just identified or as pure, as like it's chrome. It's not necessarily using it to multiply color. Your weight is what you want to adjust. Your weight is what you're dictating how specular is it. If it's a metal, this becomes 1. If it's when we're talking about our plastics, if it's 0.2, this would be 0.2. Then the roughness, and same thing. Now this one becomes a slider because that's all it is. In Arnold, 0 is no roughness, very different from the V-Ray, and means when it's really sharp. 1 means it's really, really rough. Then they have a tab for reflection, and that we never use because all it is a multiplier that is unnecessary multiplier. Confuses a lot of people. But it's all you need. And then you have a Fresnel option. Click on the Fresnel. Here's your value from 0 to 1. Very similar again, same components that we've been talking about. Now let's look at Mia X. Here's your color, weight, and roughness. Now, one thing that Maya has done with their shader that I actually kind of always appreciated was they kept it at a very component stage. V-Ray's still a little kind of like, it's a little messy. You know, here you have your diffuse, you have your reflection, you have your refraction. Arnold is the very same way. It's got its components already blocked off. You have your diffuse, you have your specular, you have your refraction. That's how it should always be. Because again, we were talking about components. Diffuse. So where you plug in your textures, or you would, if you're creating a metal, this would be black for your chrome. Reflection color, I want to leave it at white, because again, it's pure chrome. If I'm doing gold, I would change that to yellow. Reflectivity, this is your weights, this is your 0 to 1. How specular is that? Is it 0.5? Is it solid? In this case, if it's a pure metal, this would be at 1. Glossiness. Now here's your roughness. Again, different language, different name, it does the same thing. Glossiness here, I think it's the same way. We'll find out right now. But I think 1 is super tight, where the spec, or that it has 0 roughness, so it's going backwards. Where again 1 is here, and then you take it down, it becomes more rough. Just a little bit backwards. Then you have your refraction for glass and stuff. So as you see, they're all very similar. They all do the same thing, the same components. You still have to plug in diffuse, you still have to plug in a spec, you still have to plug in a roughness. They just name it a little differently. The outcome is still exactly the same. So I want to get into a little bit of HSV real quick, because I'm talking a lot about values. So how many of you guys know what HSV is?
Use saturation.
Yeah. How many people use it all the time? Nobody?
Directly? No.
Nobody. Great.
No, I do.
Okay, should. HSV, hue saturation value. In the world of CG, this is our language. You should learn this. I don't know if you've gone through color theory. Very, very, very important to understand hue, saturation, and value. They all are essentially an outcome. So if you're in a review, we always talk about, so if I see something, or if I'm doing like a texture review, I'll see something and I can instantly tell if that value is very high, or it's too saturated, or shift the hue, and those 3 elements really kind of make up color in the world of CG. Everybody uses HSV. I don't stick through it too much, but Let's go into Maya. And I am going to look. So let's do Maya. So if I want to set a color, as you see, it's always set to HSV. Now you always got to look at the hue. Where's your range of color? Color chart, color theory. Your hue. Where do you want to be at? And every color. So for example, if I go to blue, I still got to change my saturation, saying how much saturation is in that blue. The lower I go, it's sucking out that blue out of it. The harsher I go, it's very, very solid, it's very pure. But then there's also a value where that value either goes really dark or really bright. Now this almost becomes like a constant, solid, pure color that we use as like IDs. That's why they're green, they're very solid. I can't get an ID out of a solid blue like that. It doesn't work that way. But understanding these three elements will make your language and your conversations with your creatives very easy, because this is what they'll be talking about. And when you're thinking about color, when you're thinking about texturing, setting a certain, like if I'm looking at this, if I'm looking at the tip of the blue, in my value right now, would I go up or low?
Up.
Who said low? It's incorrect. I'd go a little bit higher. Maybe about somewhere right there. Now, saturation. Where does that saturation value go?
Low.
It's pretty saturated.
Yeah, it's
It's a little saturated, but I would actually take that a little bit lower. Somewhere right there. Take that down just a bit. And then it's identifying the hue, where that direction is. Where is it going more this way or is it going more that way? So understanding those three components is also going to be very, very important, and I would suggest you guys playing with that. It's not just like, oh, let me pick blue. Everything's based off of values and saturations, and then determine your hue. Is it more red? Is it less red? Is there somewhere in between? Which is also very, very, very important, and also comes very important when you're creating metals, when you're creating certain looks, when you're adjusting for it to look correctly. So for now, let's put on, let's create a metal. So again, I'm gonna let me apply this guy. And I'm gonna leave that weight at 1. Color, I'm gonna take the reflection to 1. Glossiness, yeah. So I was right. So glossiness in mental ray is 1 is like V-ray is very tight, and then if I bring the value down, it becomes more rough. So let's just render that. Let's see what I'm getting. So right now, this is a pure reflecting ball. It's a little dark, right? Let me turn the light on. Can't even see that. Oh, can you hit the lights? Great. So one of the reasons why it's also really dark, it could be my HDRI. I think I'm using an EXR and I'm not in linear space, so that's why. So let me change this really quickly. Let me grab my environment and grab. And that should change the look. Maybe not. It's a little dark. Oh, you know what? Let's see. Sorry, I haven't used Mentoray.
I think you have on the HDR. I think you have to check emit light.
Oh, at midlight.
Oh, there you go. Let's see if that worked. So I think mental ray will completely die officially now, since no, it's not doing. No, it is. It's my HDRI is still dark. Let me.
You can go into the channels and bring up the light into it.
Yeah, that's what I'm gonna do. Let me see if I can grab another one. That I have here. You know what? Let's do this. Yeah, these are all really dark.
That show usually bumps the color up. The color.
Well, the thing is that these are all calibrated HDRIs and they need to work in linear space. So let me see what this is. This is where we're exposure. I'm going to grab a different one. Let me see if. Guys. Okay, so here it goes. So we got something. Alright, so let me look at the shader real quickly. Oh, maybe I did change it. I think this is about to crash. Wow, this is pretty slow. Oh my god, this is really slow. Oh. I'm so lost. Sorry guys, give me 1 second. I'm trying to.
What's it on the presets?
No.
Turn it into metal?
No. Huh, this is weird. Alright, give me 1 second. I'm gonna use the. Black. What is that? So that's working. Not sure why that's happening. Sorry guys, give me 1 second. Do you guys use IPR a lot here, or?
Yeah.
Was it usually this low?
There it is, presets, metal.
You gotta change the power settings.
Mhm. So I'm gonna show you guys why it's also not. I just don't know why it didn't. Had it been, oh, I know why it happened. Okay, I see it. So my refraction was at white, so it was giving me my what I didn't need. All right, so let's look at the shader from the top to the bottom. So we have black and the diffuse, so it stays completely solid. We have the weight at 1. We have the color at 1 at pure white. We have our glossiness and our reflection 100%. Now, if I start taking the roughness down, the image is should start getting blurrier. This is meant to race. I think you gotta do the settings in the render settings, don't you? Where is? Why isn't? This is why we don't use Mentoray.
Final gathering?
No, Final Gallery is on. It's you gotta. I'm trying to remember. There's a.
That quality's gotta be 2:1.
Yeah.
No, you gotta turn on a glossy. Gotta find it.
In the ray tracing?
I think so. To be able to render the glossy spread. It's not doing it. This sucks.
Don't worry, it makes us feel good.
No. So is it,
Reflection blur.
I think that's inequality. No, there's. I'm trying to recall. Will we turn this on? Oh, this is really not okay. Okay, let me get back to the glossiness because this should be changing, and there's if I recall correctly, there's a pass that you have to turn on to be able to render on the glossy. Just can't remember where. Do all you guys have to render here in Mentoray, or do you guys use other softwares?
Mental ray, both.
Mentoray. We'll just give it one more go and then figure out why. Anyways, let's go into something. Let's make this like so let me change this color and let me give it a little bit of yellow. So as you see, then you start changing the type of material it is. And this is where then I go into my HSV and figure out my gold. And sometimes with gold, it depends on what kind of gold you're trying to accomplish. And then right now it's all about the saturation and the hue. So basically all I'm going to be doing is shifting my saturation to kind of get a gold material that I want. Man, this is really slow. Let me see if I can use the weight
So
content.
if you're gonna do different types of gold, like 14 karat or 18,
Yeah.
there's different materials used. So would you implement that as well?
Well, that's where you gotta kind of have to, those tints, it's all about figuring that out and making it look, and this is where the hue and the saturation come in play, because then it's about, all you're doing is just shifting the hue to getting that gold to feel and look the way it needs to, depending on the type of gold you're trying to achieve. God, I really need to figure out this roughness thing, because this is gonna kill me. You know, if I'm doing copper, you're shifting that a little bit, and then with copper, so now you get different types of copper. Then you're getting into the weight. You know, some of that harder copper it's a little bit rougher. And then you're taking the saturation down.
So if you were to do rose gold, would you paint that on, or?
Oh, you can do it here too. I mean, so let's do a little bit of a rose gold, yeah. So then we want that value to go back up. Then it's about that saturation. So now that looks really shiny. So now I'm going to take that saturation really low. And then I'm going to shift my hue a little bit. And start getting it a little bit closer to where it needs to be. You know, and then if I'm doing like a gunmetal, then you're taking these values a little bit darker. So let me take my saturation and then maybe take that a little bit higher. And you end up with a more gunmetal. Now then you talk about spec weight. So then we're talking about, you know, gunmetal, you know, again, depending on if it's that really shiny gunmetal, then it's about taking that weight down. How specular is that? You know, so you're taking that way down until you start getting the look that you need. Now, if we talk about plastics, so since we did a metal, and I gotta figure out this roughness because this is gonna kill me right now. And then, you know, when you're dealing with pure metals, this is really what you're changing. It's just the color to get kind of the look, if it's rose gold, if it's gold. You know, all you're doing is just shifting all of these until you get kind of what you're looking. And that's kind of the look out process, is tweaking and moving. Again, earlier I mentioned I sent a turntable like 15 times just to get things to make sure that you can justify something just for one look. If you get it to look right here, then it's about, okay, let me send it and let me see what it's doing with the environment. If I'm doing like a plastic, so now let's talk about the plastic that we were talking about. So the color's gonna be black, the weight's gonna stay, and let me jump up on the black because we don't want it to be 100% black. So let me just stop that real quick. I'll figure out so the reflection, so we're gonna take that to like point, what do we say, 0.2? And let me just leave this at 1. What is this? Maybe that's what's causing it, but let's check that. Okay, so now let me IPR this, and that should give me closer to a plastic. A very shiny plastic right now. If it's like a gray plastic. Now the reflection here is too much right now. So that needs to come down because that still feels very, very, very high. And this is where you're kind of dictating, okay, is it really 0.05? I'll make it a little darker. Why is that not blurry? I gotta figure out why this glossiness is not working. Oh, I think I know why. There it goes. Freaking mentor. The glossy samples. All right, so now we're getting some roughness in there. Okay, so if you're creating a plastic in Mentor, you got to turn on glossy samples. Don't forget that. You got to turn something on. So what did we say earlier? So we had a black. So let's do that. So let's create let's go back to a little bit of a black plastic. Again, I'm going very low on my reflection because the plastics, again, are not, depends on the plastic that you're doing. If we're doing plastic up here, it's very, very light. You got to compare it and how light it is. If we're doing something glossy like this, where it's very shiny, then my reflection then would go up. And let's do 0.4, because now we're adding like this layer. Now this starts feeling a little bit too much. So let me bring that back down a little bit. And let me take my roughness or my glossiness back up. In this case, just take back up to 1. Maybe it's still too much. So again, you're looking at this and you're just trying to get it at the right level. So let's go to 1. Now that starts getting in this world, a little bit more into this world. And so all it is just tweaking back and forth. So now let's go back to the metal, because I want to use the roughness and to better show what's happening here. So let's go back to. So we have a metal. So when we talked about roughness and what I said, if you add certain things, or the roughness is affected by like fingerprints and all that. But just to give you an idea of what that glossiness does, I mean, if I go here, bring it way down, it's more like a brushed metal. And that's how you got to think about it. That's the difference, is going from pure to like a really brushed, kind of very roughness. And that's all it's doing, is taking that specular that's getting from the environment and just roughing it up. So now let's throw in some maps, just so you guys can see the effect that it has. So I brought with me a couple of maps, and we're going to plug these right in and just see what they do, just so you guys can get an idea. So where is my folder? So I have this. I'm going to use. I'm going to plug in a bump map first, just so we can see. This one is the. Oh, I don't know why that. Just did that. Why did that open?
It's a TIFF.
Oh. I don't need you. Okay, I'll use that one. So I'm going to plug in a bump map. Now we're just talking about surface detail, And go up. Okay. And I'm probably gonna have to take that boat map way down. Let me take my roughness back to 0, or to 1 in this case because it's rental, right? And let's plug that in and let's render that. Let's see what that's giving us. So you guys can see the bump, yeah? So you saw what I just did? I turned the glossiness back to 1. So it can be no roughness inside this material. But the second I plugged in a map, a bumpy map, what did it do to that surface? It made it look like there's roughness. So my example right there is that this is where it gets a little tricky to identify what is actually causing the roughness. And this is where you got to see when you're creating something, is it the bump or is it the roughness, you know? And something like this, and somebody came to me on the side, like, oh, I was a little confused to what that means. And this is kind of a perfect example of what I mean, is the second I plugged in a bump, and it gave you an illusion that there's roughness. And my glossiness is at 1 for mentorate, meaning that there is absolutely no roughness within that material. And that's what I want you guys to see that. So when you're doing something, really analyze, okay, is this coming from the bump or is this really the roughness? Now, I'm gonna add some roughness just to give you what the effect would be on both. So let me save this. And let's take this to like, I don't know, 0.7. So now you've given it roughness to that material. And now if we go back and forth, it's not a whole lot that it did, because that fraction compared to the bump fraction is quite extreme. You guys see that? Very, very little that it did. You know, now the only difference, so you can say, okay, so why don't I just use roughness to get that same look? Well, here's the problem with that, is that, of course, bump is a surface detail. So when you're rotating the look, that it's going to be very different, because the roughness is just going to be flat. The bump map is giving it volume, is giving it depth, is giving it surface detail, and that's what you want. Because as you can see, I added. So now let's add more roughness just for shits. Let's go 5. Let's go to 0.5. You're going to start seeing some difference, but it's not going to be, again, that extreme. Your look doesn't make it look so different. The only thing you've caused is more render time. Now there's a little bit of shift. Now you start seeing it the lower I go, because now it's really taking that. But again, understanding what your material is doing and how to go, because look dev is all about balancing. It's about using all these components and making something look like it needs to look by plugging in a map. So now, let me take that bump way down, and let me take my glossiness back up. Oh my god, this is like slow.
Welcome to our world.
Wow. Okay, so let's take the bump down to like 0.01. And then another thing that I do want to bring up is that another problem that I see, and this is something you guys definitely should write down as a huge note, and it's a big problem that I see here, is your scale. Scale on bump is like something that it's really, really important. And that comes from the scale of the texture and how much bump it is. Again, when you're doing looked at or you're looking at a render for one of your assets, don't stick to one view. Do turntables because that will show you how much bump it is. You can see, oh my God, that bump is like ridiculous. Though it looked okay when I was viewing it here, but it definitely needs to be either a lot lower. So I see this extreme bump that it just looks really, really bad. And the scale of the texture as well, and that's huge on when you guys are doing looked at, or when you guys are texturing. The scale is everything, and I come across that 100%. Every student that I've came across, there is a scale issue, and something we don't talk about enough. Or I don't know if you guys get taught enough, but scale is so important. Data identifying that comes again from studying your surroundings, study your physicalness. Like understand that the bump. There's a certain amount of depth, but there is also a certain amount of depth at how you're viewing it. If I set it at like my bump value at like 0.1 and I'm rendering it this far, okay, yeah, it's gonna look right. The second the camera comes here, it may not. So it's adjusting that bump and making sure that that scale, for some reason people just leave it and it was just like this massive, nasty bump that doesn't look that great. And then also understanding when to use displacement maps. Displacement maps are very important. So anyways, so in this case, I've taken the bump way down. It's changed the picture already. So if I'm looking at the bump, so now I want a little bit more. Now I got to, so now I need to kind of get it. So now I'm in the looked at stage. I gotta set the bump. So let me go back to 0.1. Still too much, so let's go to 0.05, half between what I had. And when I do looked at as well, I go in sections. I plug in my diffuse, or I set my diffuse, and instantly right away the first thing that I do next is my bump, because that's your overall surface. That's the details that's coming from your actual model, or whenever you're receiving a model. So you got to balance that. So I always plug in the diffuser, I set the color, what that needs to be, then right away plug in my bump and I balance that. Because then I'm not in the thing where I plug in my roughness, then I plug in my bump, then it's like crazy, just like you guys saw that it almost made no difference. But what I want to do is like, okay, so my bump is still a little too high, so let's go to 0.025, halves, and I always do halves or quarters. Everything that I go up or down, I do in halves or quarters. Also, I don't know if you guys understand a stop, or when somebody says go up a stop or go down a stop, it's a photography term, it's a film. What's that?
F-stop.
Well, yeah, yes. It's kind of the same thing when you're thinking about it this way. A stop is more for lighting, and I try to always do fulls or quarters when I'm going up or down. And then there will be some times where you'll have to go like very just one by one, or go just a few fractions to get it just right. So I look at this, okay, I'm like, okay, my bump's good. I like that there's a little bit of breakup happening. So now I'm able to go back to my roughness. So now I can go back to my roughness and adjust my roughness. Now that I know that my bump is kind of where I need it to be, I've done a turntable, looks good. I'm gonna go in there and throw in some roughness. Now I don't need to go that high. Now I'm just gonna take it down just to give it a little bit of roughness. And I should have saved the other one. Let's do this so you guys can see. So let me save this guy. So right now my glossiness is at, there's no roughness. I'm gonna save this, and I'm gonna go to 0.8. Just bringing that down a bit. Okay, so you saw, now by just balancing the bump and adding a little roughness, you can now see just a slight jump, which is good. Now that means that we're going in the right direction. Before, when I went one to the other, there was almost no difference. You know, now because now you have these numbers clashing with this numbers, and the fractions are just too different. But now when I'm talking about balancing, I balance my bump where I like it. Now I'm adding roughness to it. So now I'm gonna add a little bit more. Let's go to 0.6. Now I should see a huge jump from where I was at before to where I'm at now. Now I have a combination of roughness and bump, and if I go back and forth, you can see that difference. Now let's add a little bit of tint in the color. Let's add a little bit of gold. Maybe we need more of that saturation. And now we're going more towards the gold. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah.
Does everybody now see in a different perspective than maybe how you guys were taught or how you understood it? Who wants to do looked at now? Cool. Looked at is great. I love doing looked at. For me, I enjoy this process. When I can sit down and just put on my headphones and just make something physically correct, I love it. It's for me, it's such a huge. I mean, every part of it. I love modeling. I love everything. I love it all. Which is why I do it all. So okay. So now we understand how to shift metals, and that's really all it is. I mean, that is kind of the foundations of how to get something kick-started. Now I'm going to take this one further step, and I'm going to plug in a roughness map. Okay, so let's look at what I have here. So let's get something interesting. This one's cool. Yeah, let's do this one. This one has a lot of, so now if I look at this map, there's a lot of range. There's a lot of white, there's a lot of dark. Now, these ranges, I'm sure, are very, I can tell just by looking at it that some of the blacks are way too black, some of the whites are way too white. But for this sake of this presentation, it's fine. Ideally, you would balance that. You would suck a lot of the black out, and you would suck a lot of the white out, and just kind of find that balance of how much roughness you want to add. But for the sake of the presentation, let's use this map, and let's, just so you guys can see what it's doing. But we'll do the handprint next, because that one is. Okay, so now let's go ahead and look at the, let's save this. Now, sometimes if you guys are doing something procedurally, as we're about to do right now, why did that not like that? Let's do it here. So now, right now, it's taking all those values and just plugging them in where it needs to. So there's like this whole thing happening here, and I can see it already here. There's a lot of breakup happening. But let's say I want to push it. You can see certain areas are broken up. Now, one thing that I like to do is I add a multiply divide, or you can use an HSV, but for me, just to show you guys. So I like using multiply divide because I'm still do a lot of the old school stuff. This is what I always learn first. Does anybody understand what this is?
Is that the same as a transformation 2D designer?
Not sure. To be honest, for designer, like, what you mean?
It controls toggling, right?
Yeah, right now what this is going to control is the values, the RGB values as a whole. So it'll take the value really high or really low. Think about it as intensity. Intensity, so it's making it stronger or less strong. Whoa. Okay, so if I'm doing, so right now I'm gonna go higher in value to bring out that roughness more. Well, hold on. Yes. No. Sorry, I gotta think backwards because again, remember how I was saying, depending on what package you use, roughness, one, and like in Mensuray, is 0 roughness, meaning that it's the specular is very, very tight. I'm used to Arnold, which 1 is completely rough. So it's using the white values to make it really rough, and it's using the black values to make it tighter, which makes sense because black you always thinking about is removing or there's nothing there. Same thing when you use a mask. White reveals, black removes. Why Mensuray and V-Ray decided to do this, I have no idea. They just want to be different, I guess. Oh, look at us. We can do it backwards. All right. So either way it should work because there's black and white values. So it'd be nice to do a little turntable so you guys can see this. It's so hard to... So I'm just going to crank this to like 5. No, not doing much. And let me multiply my map so it tiles. Maybe we'll see some smaller fractions. Okay, so I'm gonna make this map and I am gonna repeat it like, let's see, 5 times. Let's see what that does. And sometimes when I'm doing a test like this, I like to do this. I'll add a surface shader. This is a good little trick to use when you guys are typing this is do out color output into color. And I use a surface shader just so I can see what my what that map is doing. Whoa, that is okay. So that's why it's not because it's backwards. So that's why I was like, what is going on? Okay, so let me IPR this. So then I need to go lower. So I need to go like 0.2, 0.2, 0.2. There you go. So now you can see what my map is doing. So I typically like to do this when I'm doing look dev is I'll do our services just when I'm doing procedurally. Obviously if you texture, you know what that looks like. When you're doing a procedural process, when you're using a map you download or something, it's good to see it. This way you can identify where certain things are at. I can also kind of identify values, just like we did here. The other one wasn't working for us because it was like completely blown out. So that means because it's backwards, I need to go lower. So now, and let's see if we're happy with the, let's do 3, maybe that's too small. I want you guys to see the big pieces. 1 is okay. There you go. All right, so we should see something right here. So let me save this image. And let me plug back in my shader. And let me IPR. So weird to be in Mensuray. I feel like I'm cheating. All right, so now this got really rough. Now we went too low. So let me, now in IPR, I am going to, what did I just do? Now I'm gonna go back to my multiply divide and I'd start going back slowly. So let's go let's go 0.3, 0.3, 0.3. Okay, let's go a little bit more. Let's go 0.6, 0.6, 0.6. And all I'm doing is I can instantly see if it's going in the right direction. So now it's easier for me to jump in sets. First I went really low, then I doubled it. And that's kind of what you do and look at. So now you start seeing interesting things. So now let's look at what's happening. So you can start seeing the breakup in the roughness. And now right now all I'm doing is just roughness. I ain't even messing around with the spec. So now Do you guys see all these little details right here? See, that's coming from the map. So that's saying that value is more rougher. It's rougher here than it is here. And my multiplier, all it's doing is, as a whole, it's going up or low. So right now, I'm just gonna go even higher, so it can go less rough to compensate for how rough that is, if that makes sense. Did everybody understand what I'm doing right now? So now it starts looking okay. There's some cool stuff. So now when I'm at a stage like this is where I'm like, okay, I think it's time to see how a turntable looks. I would submit a turntable, rotate it, and I see what that map is doing, how much of that it is. You know, maybe I need to use a different procedure, but the idea is there. Now, if you look at the shader, let me stop that really quickly. You know, let's look at it from the top. All I've done is what we've talked about. Diffuse for metal, 0. Weight at 1. We adjusted the color to give us a little bit of a gold tint. We kept the reflectivity, or specular, at 1 because it's a solid metal, kind of what we talked about. Then we adjusted the roughness to break that up. And that's really it. And we haven't really done anything else. So just, this all comes down to, again, your approach and the maps you're using to make it look physically correct. But as a big picture, this is all really we do, is just kind of play with textures, multiply, divide up, multiply, divide down, adjust this, adjust the hue, adjust the saturation, adjust the value. I mean, I've touched almost every little bit that I talked about. Just a sphere, like just a simple sphere with just some simple textures and kind of get the ball going. Now, let me go ahead and let's do a little wood really quickly because we're running a little bit out of time. So I'm gonna use the same exact thing, and now let's go ahead and plug in a map. Let's go plug in this wood that I have here. I'm gonna instantly break this. I'm gonna go really, really, really low on my reflection. Let's just go 0.1 just so you guys can see. I'm gonna break this, and I'm gonna give it maybe 1. I'll give it a little bit of roughness. Let's go to 0.8. And I'm just gonna go ahead and change my bump map. And let's see what that looks like. Oh, look at that. There's wood. That was pretty good. Just off the bat. Just with a simple, I mean, again, I haven't done nothing magical, but just understand. And I just plugged in some numbers based off of my head of what I think. Still a little too glossy, and the bump will probably go a little bit higher. So let's go ahead and, you know what, let me get closer. Again, let's take it from the top. So diffuse is good. I like the diffuse. The specular could go down. Again, we were talking about wood, and again, it depends on the type of wood you're using. But let's play with this a little bit. So let's IPR this whole thing, so you guys can have a better look. I'm going to do something very different here as well. So I'm going to let that calculate for a second. So now what I'm going to do is actually plug in a spec map. So now you can use the spec map. Right now the spec is everywhere, right? I'm even going to go ahead and plug in a specular map. Let me stop that really quickly. Save that. And now instead of it can go in the, well, no, in this case, it's going to go in the reflection, because that's what we're going to stick to. This is, the color stays the same, doesn't change it. So let's go ahead and plug in a spec map. Let's go plug in the same map we were using right now. That seemed to work. So everybody can see the spec kind of everywhere. Now this is going to break it up. Okay, so let's take this. And let's see what this does. Whoa, look at that. Shane Wood, can somebody tell me what happened here?
Became highly reflective.
Why? What's my map doing?
Yeah, you need to.
What was that?
All the whites are like specs are super high on the whites and
Yes.
Need to reverse them.
Good. So now we have kind of like a very hot, shiny metal wood. So if you guys were doing like a model that's, you know, was this material, there you go. It's how you do it. But, so yes, very, very good. It's way too high, right? So what I need to do now is take that. Oh, why did? Let me just take this down. Is, let's go ahead and look at the, so again, I'm going to go ahead and type in a, this is my favorite, and I'm going to plug it, put one, and I'm going to plug this into, what did I say? Okay, so now let's IPR this. Oh, okay. Wow, this is like. So now let's. Man, wait until you guys start working. Those computers they have. Something right here. Excellent. Whoa. Okay, so let's look at what. Okay, yeah. So my multiplier is way off.
What about the glossy samples?
So the glossy samples is only it's a sample quality when you're rendering, like doesn't affect kind of the look. It's all it is noise. So when you do a certain quality, it'll be really noisy, and then you up those samples, and it's going to make it more crispier. And that's kind of what we start rendering for clients, or when you're doing final production. Okay, so now we're seeing some results now. Okay, so now we're back to where you see some breakup based off this map. And if it ever decides to go up, you can see it higher screen. What is it doing? I don't know what this is. I think I'm killing this machine.
just go to the power options.
All right. All right, cool. So you guys start seeing the breakup, yeah?
Yeah.
You guys see where it's being broken up, and this is kind of how you start creating what we're talking about with the wood. At certain angles, there's a breakup where it's more reflective than others. But let's take the overall down some more. Let's go to 0.05 to make it look a little bit more real, or to what I'm trying to get it looking like. Because I still feel that's too glossy. So again, when you're doing, let's say a floor and you decide to do a wood, this is what you would play with. The spec value, there's a lot, there's breakup. When you see those old furnitures that have all this kind of wear to it, a lot of that is just a combination of roughness and a combination of a spec weight. How specular certain areas are. During times, it loses its touch, it loses that glossiness that it had. This is exactly what that is.
When you make these changes, after every change, would you make a turntable to see it?
Oh no, not every change. I typically do it when I make dramatic changes. Like I'll set it up and I'll look at it and I'll rotate it a little bit and make sure everything's looking good. Once I have all my attributes in there, then I submit it. But instantly, if you see this, like this wood starts to feel,
More weather.
yeah, it starts to feel a little bit more realistic. It's and this is kind of what it is. And when you guys are doing stuff, can I hit cancel on this or okay? When you guys are creating materials, when you guys are creating your models or your textures, this is the stuff to think about and how you break things down.
So if you're doing a veneer, do you do it with this, or do you do a layered shader and do a layer coat over the top?
Now that depends. That depends again on what you're doing. For example, let me turn this. Let me turn the window because you brought up a good point. It's something we haven't covered yet.
The polish.
Now,
Yeah.
depends on you. It depends on how you model it and how it's being built. It's always essential. For example, this piece right here, we went over spec value, what color it is. Now, this essentially could be kind of what he's talking about is to do a layered shader or a coat of one, because this ideally it is two layers. There's a layer like your cell phone, there is the glass, and underneath there's a screen, and it's kind of the same thing here. For me, this would come down to the modeler. If he gave me one piece, I would send it right back and tell him to give me another. That it needs that piece that goes underneath that, because there's a level of thickness that this has. I can see it. The Wacom logo that's sitting under here, it's sitting underneath the surface, and the top is like a glass. So if I'm doing that, then it would be part of the model. Underneath it would be black, and then this top coat, the glossiness, actually is glass, or you use it as a glass shader. Even though it's plastic, it's the same contributions that it has in physical reality. The only thing is that one is bendable and one shatters. That's really the main difference. But essentially, that's what that would be, which kind of comes down to what you were saying. Then at that point, it depends on how it is. Now, if you're doing a cart paint shader, for example, that's why there's a cart paint shader, because now those contributions in that shader justify for that layering. Then it treats it as a layer. You can't use like a regular AI standard or a regular Mia X and get the same results, because the cart paint shader has more attributes to give you that same illusion of physical reality, where there is a base layer, then there is a coat of the metallic, and then there's a gloss layer that sits on top. So it's multiple layers that build up the cart paint shader. Now, in the old days, it was just literally color and gloss, and that was it. Which is kind of like a blend or something like that. But now, the paint jobs are much more interesting. There's a lot of layering, and so you can't really get that same outcome with just a regular shader. That's why people use cart paint shaders, is for that reason. We have our own custom cart paint shader that's driven the same way, where you can control the flakes, you can control the metallic, you can control the gloss on the top, everything's layered. So it's a little different than kind of going through this, but it's still kind of the same concept, the same idea. But essentially, if you're doing a cart paint or you're doing that, you'd use a cart paint shader, because then you can control this. But I would never use a cart paint shader on something like this. That would need to come from the model. So I can then apply the correct shaders to it. Does anybody have any questions so far? Who's anybody willing to come up here and create a plastic shader? No? Too early? Based on what you guys have learned?
I'll try.
You try. Come on.
Can't do preset plastic.
No. So, the presets, because somebody said the presets. And when I clicked on it, I changed it because here's what happens with those presets. Presets, everything engineered inside any package like Maya, Arnold, the books, digital tutors. These are guys that are just smart. They're just like numbers in their brain. They're developers. They develop. They show you just how it works, how you can get there. They will never be like, oh, this is how it should look, because creatively, it's just math to them. And presets are made like that. They're just made on some presets that they think it's not based on how it actually should be. They kind of just give you, okay, this is kind of what a metal should kind of be. Here it goes. So they half-ass it almost. It's never accurate. And that's why these presets are never used by anyone. And my old boss used to tell me if he ever caught us using a preset, he would fire us. Because that means that you don't have an understanding of using shaders. So if you understand the shader and you can build it from a preset, then you're on your way. You know, and it's as basic as that. And they had some other weird weight stuff that just doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense. And, you know, because in physical reality, it is just a contribution. It's fuse, it's reflection, it's roughness, it's for now, and that's it. You know, or is it subsurface? And when you start getting to skin and all that other good stuff. So, yeah, so you want to come up and give me a... You can use that same shader.
Do you want me to break out the links or anything like that? Or?
Well, create me whatever you need to do to create a plastic.
Okay, black plastic?
Give me a blue plastic. Make it easy so everybody can see the blue.
This is the, so let me...
You can use that same shader. Break whatever you need to break to get where you need to get. While he's doing that, anything that stood out to you guys that was just like, oh my god, this is like totally, I thought this was just had a whole different approach beforehand.
Creating these, using the nodes.
Yeah, creating numbers, playing around with digits, the weights.
Yeah, because we don't hear much about the node part. It's like, show goes over it really fast and then you go like, what did you do?
So everybody here has had like a material class or a shading class? Everybody?
No. I have.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really go
But it wasn't that
depth.
intense like this, but it just like really quick.
Yeah,
So-
and I think that's why I'm doing these, because I know that, and it also comes again from like just understanding. You know, it's like, I guess, and it's also how you teach it. You know, because I've heard other great supervisors as well that I worked with, and how they teach it, and it's just different. You know, people see it different. I try to see it more as a physical base, somewhere where it makes sense to me. And when it clicked, I was like, oh my god, this is like, it just clicked, and I just went bananas, and then I was able to create almost anything. And what I try to, the way I learned it, and the way I teach it is just, it comes to the fundamentals like anything else. It's like, so how does it really work in real life? Same thing with animation. Great animators become great animators because they study the fundamentals of animation, movement, basic weight, basic this. Everything's to the basics. Same thing with modeling. Modeling comes down to the basics, the fundamentals of topology. What grades a great model? Topology. If you take any of my classes or you get to work with me, when I talk about modeling, it's all about the fundamentals. Topology is the key essence. Texturing is everything. There's not one thing, and then I cover everything with texturing on fundamentals of color and paint, how, looking at little details, why that affects that, why that affects that, why you should paint it this way, not that way. Same thing with looked at. Looked at it comes down to the fundamentals of what I just showed you guys this morning. Physical reality. How does it affect? How does that work? It's all in components. Lighting is a whole other world as well. That, again, today I didn't cover anything about lighting. And all I did was just plugged in an HDRI. It's all about the material. It's all about the material. So that's why earlier I was saying, don't worry about the lighting. Right now, when you're in a looked-at stage, the most important thing is the material. It's how that is. I can plug in any other HDRIs and it will still look just as good. Because at that point, then that's just an environment that's changing, And then lighting is just a whole other different world, and it's an extension of this. But the look dev is, I think, is a very, very important stage. How are we doing, Jonathan?
Still trying to render it.
Okay, so let's just look at your components. So you have blue, weight 1, we have color reflectivity 1. So you plugged in a map into the reflection?
No, this is what you had before, which is this.
Okay.
This. But I don't need it though.
Yep. So you should break that and set it up.
Bring that up to
Give me
where it is.
just like values of what that should all look like, so.
Alright, this is pure blue.
Okay.
Blue. Look at this. My hue's at 238. Saturation's at 0.6 to 4. Saturation 78. Gives me this blue. I can bring this up to make it brighter, and I can bring in the saturation higher, make it more like a light
Okay.
blue rubbery, or make it darker, make it like a more dark blue paint, kind of.
That's fine, just leave it there, and let's go to let's go to reflection.
Okay, reflection right now is at 0.
What do you think it should be? I want a shiny plastic.
Shiny plastic reflect.
Kind of like the ones I was passing around earlier.
Somewhere around 0.4. Give it a rough.
Okay, what about the roughness?
Roughness be glossiness. Probably bring that to
It's too much.
6.
You've gone way too high in the roughness.
Alright, then be
Remember we talked about fractions. Talked about if you go too rough, it'll go very, very rough very quickly.
so just bring
So you gotta
down.
visualize it. Think about what that plastic looks like, and just visualize how rough that is. When I think about it, I always try to start imagining it as a mirror, and then the next thing I say is like, okay, so how rough does that line or that speck is, And then if I'm thinking of a plastic, I've already set my spec value. Then it's just about the roughness. It's like, okay, maybe if it's just a little rough, then I go like, in this case, it would be like 0.9 or 0.8.
Yeah. So, gotta do 0.9. Just
Now, do you think your spec weights is pretty good?
the glossy sample of 10.
No. Your reflection, your spec. Do you feel confident with that? Is that pretty good?
Yeah, it'd be like 0.3 or 0.4.
Okay, well, let's render it. See what that looks like. You drag IPR there? That should
Yep.
be pretty fast.
And I broke all the links, so it's not taking any extra time to recalculate anything.
Let's just translate and see. Huh.
I think I broke it.
Can I see something real quick?
Go ahead, sure.
I think we might have broken the scene. And then also for just jumping in really quickly and talking about presentations. Next week I'm gonna get into presentations. for those of you that are animators or just even modelers that don't necessarily want to get into look dev or are not quite there yet, you can take some of the simple stuff that I just taught today to apply just to make it look a little bit prettier. When you're doing your animations, when I talked about the play blast, like get more creative into like applying just a simple shader. All it has to be just a simple shader with some nice lighting, which my workshop's about next week, and you're just automatically gonna get something nicer. That's different from your typical play blast that we get hundreds and hundreds of animations as well. Same thing with effects. Effects is the same way a lot of effects artists use this like play blasting, and it's like a fire, smoke. Oh, great. I've seen that a million times. How you can be different is take it a little step further, presenting it at least really nicely, because people have seen this 100 times. I can't tell you how many walk cycles I've seen. I can't tell you how many like explosions I've seen. It's like, give me something different. Give me something new. At least make it look presentable. For you modelers, this is essential. Having a nice shader. Don't go bananas, but like keep it on a simple plastic with a little bit of spec and a little bit of roughness and a really nice turntable. It's gonna go a long, long way. I've seen many modeling reels from this school, and they are not great. Understanding this and just applying a little bit of this, and with the nice light, it's gonna go a long way, and you're gonna have a much presentable demo reel. Still not rendering, huh?
No.
That's
So let me just do this then. Just rendering out a region, and there it goes.
Okay, great. So let's hit one of those. Okay, not bad. What would you say is wrong with this, everybody?
It's way too.
Or just somebody else? Yeah, what would everybody say was wrong with this render?
Too shiny.
Yes. So your spec needs to come down. At this point, what I would suggest doing out in fractions, if you're at 0.4, I'd drop that down to 0.2. And let's do another region render. Or actually, just save it first. Save it.
Do you want me to make it full screen like this?
Yeah, that's fine. And then do another. And then we'll A and B. And then that's the process. That's all the process is. Rendering, oh, it's too much. Maybe take it down a little bit. Render again. Oh, it's, now went too low. So, okay, now if you do A and B, just go from this one to your next one.
Here.
Once it's done.
Let me up the power. I'll do it once it's done. Automatic, high performance.
And so now just go A and B. Let's just look at the difference from 0.4 to 0.2. Huge difference, massive. Which is why I do that. Once I do a first one, I kind of see it. Just do half of that because it's a massive jump. So you see how you go from 0.4 to 0.2. There, 0.4 to 0.2. It's a huge difference. And now I'm looking at if I'm like, okay, now I still think this is a little bit much. Then at this point now I do like 0.15. And render that region. Because now it's about fine tuning. Now I'm like getting closer to our one. I don't want to go too extreme. So now I just cut it in fractions. Oh, we didn't save the other one, did we?
No, but I can go back.
That's fine. Yeah, let's do this and let's go to 0.2. So that way we can see the difference. And how you start kind of calibrating that and getting a little closer to what y'all need. When does everybody graduate here who's in here? Like, what's the time ranges? Who's graduating this quarter? Who's got 2 quarters left? Or a quarter? You have another quarter? So it's okay. So the ones that have a few quarters left, come back later. I better see some damn good turntables or models.
Okay. Done.
Cool. So let's do the 0.2. We'll save this one. And do a 0.2. Did you render the 0.2?
It's gonna be.
Yeah, just so we can see the jump between 0.2 and 0.15. Still think this is way too reflective, by the way, but it's fine. This still shows us kind of the steps. Okay, now do A and B. And then, so now you got into fractions, and there's still quite a little jump, but if I went to like 0.1, it'd be very extreme. So again, it's taking those steps. Just want to show you those steps and kind of how I process things and how I go from big to small to small to small until I get it just right. And then I'll send it to the farm, run around, look at it, and be like, oh my God, I got to read this. This is crap. Cool. Any questions? No questions at all. Okay.
Curious about your rendering. You said that you could create any material in any package, any rendering package.
Yes.
Then why does the mill stick to Arnold as opposed to Messerite
so
or your?
yeah, so it's a good question. So why do people pick? Why do different studios pick different renderings? Well, it's package deals. That's what it comes down to. When I first came to the mill, they were Mentoray, and they were like, okay, we're done with this. We have to move a different direction. We did test out V-Ray and Arnold at the same time. Tested out performances, did a lot of R&D tests. They're all very similar outcomes. V-Ray and Arnold, like right there, little things are better in Arnold than it is V-Ray, and V-Ray has some things that are better. But in the end, where we went Arnold was clientele. The guys at Arnold are like, you guys go with us, we'll give you this X amount of licenses with this amount of support that we weren't getting from V-Ray, and that's why we chose Arnold. And with Arnold, we've been very successful because they've given us a full range of R&D, like, you know, anything we ask for, they will do for us. And that's going to be interesting because they just got bought out by Autodesk. So that'll be interesting. But the relationship's still there, and that's why we chose Arnold. It's just a better deal. And that's usually what it comes down to. You know, V-Ray works with certain companies, and they cut them a deal, and, you know, it's just how it works. But yeah, you can definitely, you know, I can render this. The theory behind today is the same no matter what render you use. The shaders still give you the same contributions. It's just a slightly different name, but the value ranges are it's always 0 to 1. Backwards or forwards, it doesn't matter. Cool, thanks, Jonathan. So I would say, hopefully you guys got some from this workshop. Hopefully I'll see you guys next week. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'll be here for another maybe 10 minutes or so. If anybody has questions, please feel free to stop by and ask anything. Thanks, guys.